Chapter 8: Summer Revelations. July arrived with unrelenting heat that transformed Silver Creek and its surroundings into a study of golden browns and faded greens. Only Clara's carefully tended garden, with its disciplined rows of vegetables and cheerful borders of marigolds, defied the season's scorching touch, testament to her diligent watering and Hannah's enthusiastic assistance with mulching. The Hollister Commission, elaborate entrance gates for the territory's most prosperous ranch, had consumed the better part of Eli's working hours for weeks. Clara had watched the project evolve from preliminary sketches to the magnificent reality that now stood in sections around the smithy, awaiting transport to its final destination. The intricate scroll work incorporated climbing roses and wild Montana flowers, each petal and leaf rendered with such fidelity that Clara half expected them to sway in the occasional hot breeze that stirred the air. "It's your finest work," she observed one evening as she and Eli circled the assembled sections, examining details in the slanting sunlight. "Mrs. Hollister will be delighted." A shadow of uncertainty crossed his features, despite the obvious quality of the craftsmanship. "It meets the specifications. Whether it satisfies their expectations remains to be seen." "It exceeds any reasonable expectation," Clara countered firmly. "You've captured both strength and beauty in equal measure, precisely what entrance gates should convey." Eli accepted her assessment with the slight nod that had become his habitual acknowledgement of praise. Over months of shared life, Clara had learned to recognize the subtle indicators of his emotions, the barely perceptible relaxation of his shoulders that signaled relief, the momentary softening around his eyes that revealed pleasure. "Hollister wants the gates delivered and installed before their daughter's birthday celebration next week," he said, moving to examine a connection point with critical attention. "I'll need to leave tomorrow morning if I'm to allow sufficient time for proper mounting and any necessary adjustments." Though his tone remained matter-of-fact, Clara detected the underlying tension in his statement. In the 14 months since her arrival, Eli had never spent a night away from the household. Day trips to outlying properties for deliveries or repairs had been his maximum absence. "How long will the journey and installation require?" she asked, careful to match his practical approach rather than highlighting the significance of this impending separation. 2 days at minimum," he replied, straightening to his full height. "One for travel and initial positioning, another for securing and final adjustments, possibly a third if complications arise, though I don't anticipate that." Clara nodded, mentally cataloging household preparations that would be necessary. "Hannah and I will manage perfectly well. The garden provides amply now, and we've bread enough for several days." Eli's gaze shifted toward the house, where Hannah could be seen feeding kitchen scraps to the half-dozen chickens they'd acquired that spring. Something in his expression, a flicker of concern quickly masked, told Clara that practical household management wasn't his primary worry. "She's never been without both parents," he began, then stopped abruptly, seeming to realize his implication. The unintended categorization of Clara as parental figure hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging nor dismissing its significance. Their relationship had evolved subtly since the Founders' Day dance a month earlier, with small but meaningful adjustments to established patterns. Eli had begun joining Clara and Hannah for their morning garden inspections without fail, occasionally bringing his coffee to share the peaceful moments before workday demands separated them. Evening reading sessions now included his regular participation rather than mere proximity, his deep voice bringing particular resonance to certain biblical passages. "Hannah will be perfectly safe with me," Clara assured him, tacitly accepting the role his words had suggested. "We'll maintain normal routines and find pleasant diversions to pass the time until your return." Later that evening, after Hannah had been tucked into bed with promises of special projects during her father's absence, Eli appeared in the kitchen doorway as Clara finished preserving the day's harvest of green beans. His expression held the intent focus she'd come to recognize as indicator of significant communication to follow. "I've prepared a list," he said, extending a folded paper with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Locations of essential items, instructions for specific concerns that might arise." Clara dried her hands on her apron before accepting the document, which proved to be several pages of detailed notes written in Eli's precise hand. This is quite comprehensive, she observed, scanning directions ranging from the location of extra lamp oil to instructions for securing the chicken coop against predators. Perhaps excessive, he acknowledged, a hint of self-deprecation softening his serious demeanor. Hannah knows most household operations as well as I do. Nevertheless, your thoroughness is appreciated, Clara replied, recognizing the preparation represented concern rather than doubt in her capabilities. Is there anything specific about Hannah I should be aware of during your absence? Ellie hesitated, seeming to measure his words carefully. She may appear perfectly content, then suddenly become anxious without obvious cause. Margaret's passing left her sensitive to unexpected separations. He rubbed the back of his neck, a rare gesture of discomfort. She sometimes wakes with nightmares she won't discuss. Sitting with her usually helps, even if she refuses to explain what frightened her. The information, offered with such evident care for his daughter's emotional well-being, touched Clara deeply. I'll watch for any signs of distress, she promised, and ensure she knows your absence is temporary and planned, unlike... She left the comparison unspoken, unnecessary between them. Thank you, he said simply. The words weighted with meaning beyond conventional gratitude. For understanding what I cannot properly explain. Morning came with the hushed stillness that often preceded extreme heat, the sun barely cresting the eastern mountains as Eli loaded the dismantled gates onto the reinforced wagon he'd borrowed from Mr. Peterson for the journey. Hannah followed him back and forth between smithy and conveyance, peppering him with questions and reminders with transparent purpose, delaying the inevitable departure through sheer volume of conversation. You remembered extra horseshoe nails and the special polish for the decorative elements? What if the measurements don't match what Mr. Hollister told you? Will you sleep in their house or the bunkhouse with the ranch hands? Eli answered each inquiry with patient thoroughness, recognizing her chatter as manifestation of anxiety rather than mere childish curiosity. When at last the wagon stood ready, he knelt to Hannah's level, his large hands gentle on her shoulders. 2 days, he said firmly. 3 at most. You'll help Miss Abernathy with household tasks and garden tending, and I'll return before you've properly missed me. Hannah's brave smile faltered slightly. Promise you'll be careful? The mountain road has those steep places, and Mr. Jensen says there's been talk of outlaws near Granite Pass. I promise to exercise every caution, he assured her gravely. And Mr. Hollister is sending 2 ranch hands to meet me at Eagle Creek Crossing as escort for the final stretch. No outlaws would dare trouble a party of 3 armed men. This practical reassurance seemed to calm Hannah's immediate concerns. She threw her arms around her father's neck in fierce embrace before stepping back with visible effort at maturity. I'll take special care of the chickens and help Clara with everything. You won't come home to find a single thing out of place. After final instructions and farewells, Eli climbed onto the wagon seat. His gaze met Clara's over Hannah's head, conveying trust and appreciation alongside unspoken concern. I've left everything in readiness, he said, the statement encompassing more than mere household preparations. But if any difficulty arises, we'll manage admirably, Clara assured him, her hand resting lightly on Hannah's shoulder. Safe journey and Godspeed, Mr. Thornton. As the wagon rumbled down the track toward the main road, Hannah maintained her brave composure until it disappeared around the bend. Then she turned to Clara with determined brightness that barely masked underlying anxiety. What shall we do first? I could help with laundry, or weed the garden, or practice my arithmetic since school starts again next month. First, Clara replied, recognizing Hannah's need for structure and distraction, we'll prepare a proper breakfast. Then we'll create a plan for our 2 days of independence that includes both work and pleasurable activities. The strategy proved effective, with Hannah throwing herself into household tasks with exaggerated diligence, clearly intent on proving herself responsible in her father's absence. By evening, they had completed the day's chores, harvested vegetables for the next day's meals, and organized supplies for a special project Clara had proposed, creating a sampler that documented the garden's first successful season. Time for sleep, Clara announced after their evening reading, noting Hannah's poorly concealed yawns despite her protests of complete wakefulness. Tomorrow brings fresh activities and another day closer to your father's return. After seeing Hannah settled, Clara completed her own preparations for bed, mentally reviewing the day's events with satisfaction tempered by awareness of the emptiness Eli's absence created in the household. She had grown accustomed to his quiet presence in the evening hours, the sound of his chair creaking as he studied design journals, the occasional comment about community matters gleaned during business interactions, the reassuring knowledge of his solid dependability just beyond the lamplight's circle. When she entered her small bedroom, the glow of her candle illuminated something unexpected on her pillow. A perfect rose carved from pale wood, its delicate petals and graceful stem rendered with the same attention to detail that characterized Eli's finest metalwork. No note accompanied the gift, none needed to convey its meaning. Appreciation, acknowledgement, and something deeper neither had yet named aloud. Clara lifted the carving with careful fingers, its smooth surface revealing hours of painstaking effort that must have been accomplished during moments stolen from commissioned work. Unlike the grand Hollister gates that would establish Eli's public reputation, this small creation represented private sentiment, something crafted solely for her, with no practical purpose beyond expressing what words had not yet formed between them. As she prepared for sleep, Clara noticed other evidence of Eli's thoughtful preparation for his absence. More firewood stacked beside the kitchen stove than their summer cooking required, a loose porch step repaired without her having mentioned its wobble, the garden gate rehung to eliminate its tendency to stick in hot weather. Each detail spoke of care extending beyond practical household management to personal consideration of her comfort and convenience. Clara placed the wooden rose on her small bedside table where moonlight through the window bathed it in silver illumination. Its presence transformed the familiar room, creating a tangible connection to the absent craftsman whose thoughts had clearly encompassed far more than business concerns as he prepared for his journey. 2 days, she whispered to herself, echoing Eli's promise to Hannah. 3 at most. Yet as she extinguished her candle and settled beneath the summer weight quilt, Clara recognized that something fundamental had already shifted within the household, not through Eli's temporary absence, but through the deepening awareness of what his presence had come to mean to both females he'd left behind. The second day of Ellie's absence passed in orderly productivity until mid-afternoon, when the July heat built to oppressive intensity that even Clara's usually unflappable disposition found challenging. The air hung heavy with moisture, pressing against skin and lungs with weighted insistence that made the simplest movements require deliberate effort. "Perhaps we should postpone further garden work until evening," she suggested to Hannah, whose flushed face betrayed similar discomfort despite determined attempts to continue weeding. "This heat suggests we might see a thunderstorm before nightfall." Hannah's head jerked up at Clara's casual observation, her expression shifting from mere discomfort to unmistakable apprehension. "Thunder? Are you certain?" The reaction seemed disproportionate until Clara recalled Eli's warning about Hannah's sensitivity to unexpected separations. "Simply a possibility given the temperature and humidity," she replied with deliberate nonchalance. "We have ample indoor tasks to occupy us if rain arrives." Hannah nodded with visible effort at composure, though her gaze drifted repeatedly toward the western horizon, where dark clouds had begun gathering above distant mountains. They returned to the house to begin dinner preparations, but Clara noticed the girls' unusual quietness and frequent glances through windows as the afternoon progressed. When the first distant rumble of thunder sounded just after their evening meal, Hannah dropped the plate she had been drying. It shattered against the wooden floor, fragments scattering in a pattern that momentarily paralyzed the child with dismay. "I'm sorry," she exclaimed, tears welling as she knelt to gather broken pieces. "I didn't mean to. My hands just—" "No harm done," Clara assured her, crouching to help collect the shards. "Accidents happen to everyone, particularly when we're tired or distracted." She deliberately avoided mentioning the approaching storm, though another rumble, closer now, emphasized its steady advance toward Silver Creek. Hannah's hands trembled as they worked together to clear the broken dish, her breathing quickening with each flash of lightning visible through windows. When the task was completed, Clara suggested they continue the embroidery project begun that morning. The light remains adequate for needlework, she observed, guiding Hannah toward the front room's comfortable chairs. Though perhaps we might enjoy a story while we stitch. I could read from that collection of fairy tales Mrs. Porter lent us. The distraction worked, briefly, with Hannah settling beside Clara as she read tales of enchanted forests and clever heroines overcoming obstacles through intelligence rather than mere beauty. But as daylight faded and the storm drew nearer, the girl's agitation increased visibly, flinching at thunder, startling at particularly vivid lightning flashes, her needlework forgotten in her lap. When rain finally arrived, it came not as gentle relief from heat, but as pounding assault against windows and roof. Wind-driven torrents lashed the house with percussive intensity, while lightning transformed night to momentary harsh day with increasing frequency. A tremendous crack of thunder directly overhead shattered Hannah's fragile composure entirely. "Pause out there!" she cried, abandoning all pretense of bravery as she buried her face against Clara's side. "He's caught in this storm all alone, just like Ma was when she... Understanding flooded Clara with painful clarity. Eli's cryptic warning about Hannah's sensitivity suddenly acquired specific meaning. Margaret Thornton had died during a storm similar to this one, leaving permanent association between violent weather and devastating loss in her daughter's emotional landscape. "Your father is safe at the Hollister Ranch by now," Clara assured her, gathering the trembling child into protective embrace. "Remember his message this morning. The ranch hand who delivered it confirmed his arrival yesterday evening." This rational reminder made little impression against Hannah's rising panic. Her slight body shook with fear beyond logical reassurance, tears soaking Clara's bodice as another thunderclap rattled windows throughout the house. "Ma said she'd be right back," Hannah whispered between sobs. "She just went to check the chickens when the storm started. Pa was gone delivering in town. She just went to make sure they were secure, but the lightning..." Her voice broke on remembered horror no child should carry. Clara's heart contracted with fresh understanding of both Hannah's terror and Eli's reluctance to leave them, even temporarily. She gathered the girl closer, rocking gently as torrential rain continued its assault on the roof above them. "I'm frightened too," she admitted softly, honesty seeming more valuable than false bravado. "Storms hold power that reminds us how small we are. But we're safe inside this strong house your father built, and he's equally secure at the Hollisters' substantial ranch." Hannah's trembling subsided slightly, though she maintained desperate grip on Clara's sleeve. "Truly? You're afraid too?" "Truly," Clara confirmed, "which is why people have always gathered together during storms, not just for physical protection, but for the comfort of shared courage." As darkness deepened beyond rain-lashed windows and lightning continued its sporadic illumination, Clara recognized that conventional comfort proved insufficient against Hannah's deeply rooted fears. Drawing on her own childhood memories, she began singing softly hymns her mother had offered during Boston's winter gales, when thunder's distant relative, the howling nor'easter, had rattled windows and threatened to extinguish precious heating flames. "Through fiercest drought and storm and heat, through tribulation deep," she sang the familiar words of How Firm a Foundation, acquiring fresh meaning in their present circumstance. "What more can he say than to you he hath said, to you who for refuge to Jesus have fled?" Hannah's grip gradually loosened as Clara continued through verses promising divine protection and ever-present support. When the first hymn concluded, she moved seamlessly to others, creating a gentle counterpoint to the storm's continued rage beyond their shelter. Between songs, she shared stories from Scripture, featuring divine protection during natural calamity, Noah's preservation through earth-drowning deluge, the disciples' rescue when Christ calmed raging seas, Paul's survival of tempest-driven shipwreck. "God doesn't always prevent storms," she explained as lightning briefly transformed Hannah's tear-stained face to stark monochrome. "But he remains present within them, guiding us toward eventual calm and the rainbow that follows even the most frightening tempest." As the hours advanced and the storm gradually moved eastward, Hannah's terror slowly yielded to exhaustion. Yet each time Clara suggested retiring to bed, fresh anxiety tensed the child's features. "Would you stay with me tonight?" Hannah finally whispered. the request carrying vulnerability that transcended mere childish desire for company. "Just until morning comes or Pa returns?" "Of course," Clara agreed without hesitation, recognizing the depth of trust such a request represented. "Let me bank the fire and secure the doors. Then we'll make ourselves comfortable in your room." After completing household safety checks amplified by the storm's continued, if lessening, severity, Clara helped Hannah prepare for bed. The girl's room felt particularly vulnerable to the elements, its small window periodically illuminated by lightning that emphasized rather than dispelled the shadows between flashes. Hannah crawled beneath her quilt, still wearing her day dress, unwilling to release Clara's hand even briefly for changing into nightclothes. Clara settled beside her atop the coverlet, back against the wall and legs extended beside Hannah's small form. The arrangement provided comfort without overheating in the summer night's lingering warmth, now heavy with humidity from the passing storm. "Would you like more stories or songs?" Clara offered as Hannah curled against her side, exhaustion finally overcoming persistent fear. "Just stay," came the mumbled reply, the girl's eyes already closing despite occasional flinches when thunder, now more distant, rumbled across the valley. "Don't leave me alone." "I won't," Clara promised, smoothing damp hair from Hannah's forehead with gentle fingers. "Not tonight, not ever, as long as you need me." The simple vow, offered without qualification or time limit, settled between them like a physical presence. Commitment transcending conventional employment or temporary arrangement. As Hannah finally surrendered to sleep, her breathing deepening despite the storm's occasional reminders, Clara maintained protective vigilance beside her. Hours passed, the storm gradually yielding to gentle rainfall that pattered against the roof with soothing regularity. Clara found herself drifting between wakefulness and light slumber, her arm around Hannah's shoulders, the girl's complete trust evidenced by deep, untroubled rest against her side. Dawn approached with subtle lightning visible through the window. Not the dramatic sunrise of clear Montana mornings, but the gradual dissipation of darkness that suggested continuing cloud cover above. Clara had just closed her eyes for what she promised herself would be merely momentary rest when the soft creak of floorboards in the hallway outside Hannah's room brought instant alertness. The door opened with deliberate quietness to reveal Eli, rain-drenched and travel-worn, his expression shifting from concern to profound relief at the sight that greeted him. Clara raised her free hand in wordless greeting, unwilling to disturb Hannah's hard-won slumber by speaking or moving. Eli crossed the small room with careful steps that barely sounded against the wooden floor. His clothes clung to his powerful frame, testament to hours of riding through lingering rainfall to reach home sooner than his original schedule had indicated. When he reached the bed, he crouched to eye level with its occupants, his gaze moving from his peacefully sleeping daughter to Clara's undisguised welcome. "The storm?" he asked softly, understanding without explanation why Clara would be found in such position. She nodded, keeping her voice equally quiet. "She remembered your wife's passing. I couldn't leave her." A complex mixture of emotions crossed Eli's features. Gratitude, remembered grief, and something deeper that caused his gaze to linger on Clara's face with unguarded appreciation. Without speaking, he crossed to the chest of drawers and withdrew a folded quilt from its lowest compartment. Returning to the bed, he shook it open with practiced motion and settled it gently over Clara, careful not to disturb Hannah's slumber. As he arranged the covering, his hand brushed Clara's shoulder in what might have been accidental contact, except for the momentary pause, his fingers resting against her with deliberate gentleness before withdrawing. The simple touch conveyed volumes that words might have rendered less eloquent. Gratitude for her care of Hannah, recognition of her commitment beyond professional duty, and acknowledgement of deepening connection between them. "Rest now," he whispered, his deep voice barely audible even in the room's close confines. "I'll see to the animals and breakfast when you wake." Clara nodded, suddenly aware of bone-deep fatigue resulting from hours of vigilance and emotional support. As Eli moved toward the door with the same careful quietness that had marked his entrance, she felt herself drifting toward genuine sleep for the first time since the storm began. Her last conscious thought before surrendering to slumber was not of the tempest just weathered, but of the gentle pressure of Eli's hand against her shoulder. Brief contact that somehow communicated security more profound than rational argument or physical shelter had provided during the night's darkest hours. In that momentary connection lay unspoken promise of protection, flowing not in one direction but between them, mutual sheltering against life's inevitable storms. When she finally woke, hours later, Hannah still sleeping soundly against her side, Clara found fresh coffee waiting in the kitchen and the wooden rose from her bedside table placed beside it. Silent acknowledgement from Eli that he had discovered and understood her treasuring of his gift. Beyond the windows, Montana sunshine had returned with characteristic intensity, transforming raindrops clinging to the garden's greenery into countless prisms that scattered light in rainbow patterns across the awakening landscape. The storm had passed, as all storms eventually must. What remained, strengthened rather than damaged by its temporary fury, was the growing certainty that whatever weather life might bring, none of them need face it alone again. The successful installation of the Hollister gates brought immediate benefits, beyond the substantial payment that now rested securely in the tin box beneath the loose floorboard in Eli's bedroom. Word of the magnificent entrance spread throughout the territory's more prosperous circles, bringing a steady stream of visitors to the smithy. Some merely curious, others bearing genuine commissions for work that extended beyond horseshoes and hinges. "Mr. Peterson says you'll need to hire an apprentice soon if business continues growing," Clara observed one evening in late July, as she set a plate of fresh biscuits on the supper table. He mentioned his nephew has shown interest in metalwork. Eli looked up from helping Hannah with a stubborn knot in her hair ribbon. "Peterson talks more than he listens," he replied, though without real annoyance. "The current increase likely represents temporary curiosity rather than sustainable demand." "Perhaps," Clara allowed, recognizing his instinctive caution regarding good fortune. "But your private workshop has remained untouched for weeks while you complete these new commissions. I wondered if you might permit me to clean it properly while you focus on immediate projects." The request represented considerable presumption given the workshop's status as Eli's most private domain. Though he had shared its existence with Clara months earlier, she had entered it only twice since, both times at his specific invitation to view completed pieces before delivery to customers. Hannah looked between them with evident interest, aware that the small building behind the smithy represented territory she herself had never been permitted to explore. "Could I help too, Pa? I promise not to touch any tools or special things." Eli's hesitation suggested internal debate between practicality and privacy. Finally, he nodded with cautious acceptance. "The dust has likely grown thick enough to harvest," he acknowledged. "But there are delicate works in progress that shouldn't be disturbed, and materials organized according to my own system." "We'll exercise appropriate care," Clara assured him, pleased at this additional evidence of growing trust between them. "Perhaps you might show us which areas require particular caution before we begin?" The next morning found Clara alone in the workshop, Hannah having been diverted to assist Mrs. Jensen with raspberry picking after Eli's initial tour had revealed more potential hazards than he felt comfortable exposing his daughter to without his direct supervision. Clara had secretly agreed with his assessment. Delicate tools with sharp edges, containers of caustic solutions for metal treatment, and precious materials that might tempt innocent fingers all presented risks to an enthusiastic child, regardless of good intentions. "I'll return within the hour," Eli had promised before departing for the smithy where a customer awaited. "The unmarked cabinet in the corner contains items requiring special handling. Perhaps leave that area untouched until I can properly supervise." Clara began with practical basics, sweeping accumulated wood shavings and metal filings from the floor, dusting surfaces that had clearly gone untended during Eli's recent focus on commissioned work, arranging tools that had been left in hasty disarray rather than in their designated places. The methodical tasks provided opportunity to appreciate details of the space she hadn't previously noticed. The precise arrangement of pliers and hammers according to size and function. The careful labeling of material containers in Eli's distinctive script. The northern exposure of windows that provided ideal light for detail work without direct glare. Near the workbench where Eli crafted his smaller pieces, she discovered a drawer partially open, its contents shifted as if hastily accessed and improperly closed. Intending merely to secure it properly, Clara attempted to push it shut, only to find something blocking its path. When careful pressure failed to resolve the obstruction, she opened the drawer fully to address the problem. A leather-bound volume lay within, its dimensions explaining the drawer's resistance to closure. The book appeared well used, its cover burnished with handling and corners softened from frequent reference. No title marked its spine or cover to indicate purpose or contents. Clara hesitated, aware that its removal constituted potential invasion of Eli's privacy, despite his general permission to organize the workshop. The drawer itself, however, required attention if it was to function properly. With reluctant determination, Clara lifted the book carefully, intending merely to examine the drawer mechanism for damage or obstruction. As she raised the volume, it fell open naturally to pages that had been frequently consulted, revealing contents that momentarily stole her breath. Drawings, not the practical sketches Eli created to guide his commissioned work, but artistic renderings of extraordinary beauty and vision. Page after page displayed architectural elements, jewelry designs, and decorative objects that transcended functional metalwork and entered the realm of fine art. Delicate archways whose scrollwork told stories through carefully positioned elements, gates whose practical purpose became secondary to their visual narrative, lighting fixtures whose forms mimicked natural elements with such fidelity that they seemed more botanical specimen than fabricated objects. Clara turned pages with increasing wonder, recognizing that these designs represented creative vision far exceeding anything Eli had produced publicly. Even the Hollister gates, his most ambitious executed commission, appeared restrained compared to these unfettered expressions of artistic imagination. Most striking were the jewelry designs interspersed throughout the volume. Necklaces whose pendants incorporated Montana wildflowers rendered in precious metals, hair ornaments that transformed functional purpose into wearable sculpture, rings whose settings told visual stories beyond mere display of stones. Each piece had been rendered with exquisite detail, accompanied by notations regarding materials, construction techniques, and occasional references to symbolic meanings. So absorbed was Clara in this unexpected revelation that she failed to register approaching footsteps until Eli's shadow fell across the open pages in her hands. She looked up to find him standing in the doorway, his expression a complex mixture of surprise, vulnerability, and something approaching embarrassment. The drawer wouldn't close properly," she explained, mortification heating her cheeks as she realized how her innocent intention might appear. "I only meant to check for obstruction, not to pry into private matters." Eli crossed to where she stood, his movements deliberate rather than angry. "The binding has warped slightly with age and frequent handling," he said, accepting the volume from her outstretched hands. "The drawer hasn't closed completely in years." "These designs are extraordinary," Clara said quietly, unable to pretend she hadn't seen and appreciated their quality. "Far beyond anything currently displayed in your public work." Eli's fingers traced the leather cover with unconscious familiarity before he set the book on his workbench. "Impractical fancies," he said, the dismissive phrase carrying an echo that suggested repeated characterization rather than personal assessment. "Designs that pleased my eye without consideration for market demand or efficient production." "They reflect remarkable vision," Clara countered gently, "and exceptional artistic sensitivity beyond mere craftsmanship." Eli glanced toward her, something guarded yet yearning in his expression. "Margaret called them my castle dreams," he said after a moment's hesitation. "Beautiful but unbuildable, at least in a place like Silver Creek." The reference to his late wife, offered without the pain such memories had once evoked, provided context Clara hadn't anticipated. "She didn't encourage these more artistic expressions?" "She prioritized security," Eli replied, his tone suggesting understanding rather than criticism. "A reliable income for our small family, practical work with dependable demand." He opened the book to a page displaying an elaborate chapel entrance, whose doors incorporated biblical scenes within their framework. These represented distraction from reliable business that kept food on our table and coal in our stove. Clara studied the drawing with fresh appreciation, recognizing both its artistic merit and the legitimate practical concerns it might have raised for a young wife focused on family stability. Were these created before you established your reputation, when security seemed less certain? The question appeared to surprise Eli with its insight. Yes, he acknowledged. Most date from our early years here when regular custom remained unpredictable and winter reserves often grew thin before spring arrived. Circumstances change, Clara observed, moving to stand beside him as he turned pages with increasing openness. What once seemed impractical extravagance might now represent logical expansion for an established craftsman, whose reputation has been secured through practical work. Eli's hands stilled on a page displaying a church pulpit whose supporting structure incorporated Montana flora and fauna in symbolic representation of creation's testimony. You believe these might find actual buyers? Here in the territory? Perhaps not all in Silver Creek, Clara conceded. But Montana territory grows increasingly connected to eastern markets. Wealthy mine owners building showcase homes in Helena and Bannock, churches seeking distinctive elements to elevate their sanctuaries beyond mere functionality. She paused, weighing her next suggestion carefully. And eastern markets themselves remain accessible through proper introduction and representation. Eli closed the book with gentle precision, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. You speak from knowledge rather than mere encouragement, he observed. Your father's business connections provided such insight? Clara nodded, pleased by his perceptiveness. He supplied furnishings to Boston's finest homes during periods of renovation and redecoration, quality craftsmanship commanding appropriate prices from those who recognized its value and possessed means to acquire it. She gestured toward the sketchbook. These designs would attract significant interest in such circles, particularly with provenance as distinctive as Montana Territory craftsmen. Eli's expression suggested he found the concept simultaneously appealing and discomfiting, the artist in him responding to potential appreciation, while the practical provider questioned reaching beyond established parameters. Something to consider, he said finally, returning the volume to its drawer with careful hands, though the path from Montana workshop to Boston parlor remains difficult to envision. Clara recognized the response as neither acceptance nor rejection, but thoughtful acknowledgement of possibilities, perhaps previously unconsidered. As they completed the workshop's cleaning together, conversation turned to more immediate matters: Hannah's upcoming school term, the garden's productive yield, community preparations for harvest season. Yet Clara noticed how Eli's gaze occasionally returned to the drawer containing his castle dreams, with speculative assessment that suggested internal recalibration of long-established boundaries. Seeds planted in fertile soil required neither forcing nor constant attention, she reminded herself as they walked together toward the house for the midday meal. Merely favorable conditions, occasional nourishment, and patience, while natural growth occurred at its own appropriate pace. August brought the year's most oppressive heat, turning Silver Creek's dirt streets to powdery dust that coated everything from laundry to garden vegetation with persistent grime. The smithy's typical warmth became nearly unbearable by mid-afternoon, forcing Eli to adjust his working hours to early morning and evening, with household tasks filling the brutal midday period when even the forge's heat seemed excessive. The altered schedule provided Clara with unexpected privacy during afternoon hours, when both Thorntons occupied themselves with quiet activities away from the main living areas. Hannah generally napped or read in the relative coolness beneath the cottonwood tree, while Eli used the time for design work and planning in the small bedchamber that doubled as his office during inclement weather. This arrangement offered perfect opportunity for the project Clara had been contemplating since discovering Eli's sketchbook 2 weeks earlier. Seated at the small writing desk he had crafted for her birthday, she carefully copied selected designs from memory, not the complete renderings his book contained, but simplified versions that conveyed essential elements without revealing proprietary details. Each drawing received meticulous attention, her limited artistic skill compensated by determined precision and frequent reference to mental images retained from her brief exposure to the originals. Accompanying these sketches, Clara composed careful letters to 3 of her father's former business associates in Boston. Men whose judgment she respected and whose connections might provide viable entree to potential markets for Eli's more distinctive work. Each letter followed similar structure: brief personal introduction establishing her father's connection, explanation of her current circumstances without dwelling on James Wright's deception, and detailed description of the exceptional metalwork being produced in this remote Montana community. Thornton Metalworks represents craftsmanship rarely encountered even in established Eastern workshops, she wrote to Mr. Harrison Winthrop, whose showroom had featured her father's finest pieces. The accompanying sketches, though inadequate representations of the actual designs, may suggest the caliber of work available. Of particular note are architectural elements that might interest clients currently renovating historic properties or constructing new showcases of personal prosperity. To ensure Eli's professional reputation remained foremost, Clara emphasized his established success within the territory, the Hollister Commission's significance, and his meticulous attention to both aesthetic appeal and functional reliability. She positioned his work not as frontier curiosity, but as exceptional craftsmanship that happened to originate beyond traditional manufacturing centers. While Montana Territory might seem remote from Boston's refined markets, she explained to Mr. Samuel Hartwell, whose clientele included the city's most discriminating families, transportation improvements have rendered such distances increasingly manageable for carefully selected commissions. Items of particular quality and distinctive design would justify such arrangements, especially when unavailable from more convenient sources. Each letter required multiple drafts, with Clara weighing every phrase for accuracy, authenticity, and appropriate promotion without exaggeration. The process consumed most of her afternoon, privacy for nearly a week, resulting in correspondence she believed represented Eli's work with integrity, while opening possibilities he might never have pursued independently. The final step, sharing this initiative with Eli himself, presented more formidable challenge than the letter's careful composition. Clara recognized that her actions, regardless of benevolent intention, constituted significant presumption. She had not merely admired his private designs, but actively worked to promote them without prior consultation or explicit permission. On the evening she had finally prepared the letters for mailing, complete with carefully protected sketches and return envelopes for interested responses, Clara found herself uncharacteristically anxious as she waited for Hannah's bedtime. The girl seemed determined to extend her waking hours through endless questions and observations, perhaps sensing her caretaker's distraction. "Are you feeling poorly?" Hannah asked as Clara absently braided the child's hair for sleep. "Your hands aren't steady like usual, and you've been awful quiet since supper." "Simply tired," Clara assured her, forcing focused attention to the task at hand. "The heat makes proper rest difficult for everyone." When Hannah had finally settled, Clara returned to the kitchen where Eli sat reviewing accounts by lamplight, his expression reflecting satisfaction with recent business improvements. The leather portfolio containing her prepared correspondence rested like physical manifestation of conscience on the small table beside her rocking chair, its presence drawing her gaze despite attempts to focus on evening mending. "Something troubles you?" Eli observed after several minutes of unusual silence, broken only by the rhythmic creak of her chair against plank flooring. "You've refolded that same pillowcase 3 times without progressing to actual repair." The perceptive comment, evidence of his increasing attentiveness to her moods and habits, simultaneously touched and disconcerted Clara. She set aside the neglected mending with deliberate care, gathering courage for the conversation ahead. "I've taken certain initiative that requires your awareness and approval before proceeding further," she began, rising to retrieve the portfolio with hands less steady than she might have wished. "My intentions were entirely honorable, though I recognize potential overstepping of appropriate boundaries." Eli's expression shifted from mild curiosity to focused attention, his ledger forgotten as Clara placed the leather case before him. "This appears quite formal for household matters," he observed, making no move to open it without further explanation. "It concerns your business rather than household management," Clara admitted, returning to her chair with rigid posture that betrayed her apprehension. "Specifically, potential expansion beyond territorial markets." Understanding dawned in Eli's features even before he opened the portfolio. The sketchbook designs, he said, neither question nor accusation, but simple recognition of connection between recent discovery and present tension. Clara nodded, watching with carefully controlled anxiety as he examined the contents she had prepared with such diligence. His expression remained unreadable as he reviewed her sketches, then turned to the accompanying letters with increasing focus that suggested absorption rather than immediate reaction. When he finally spoke, his tone carried controlled neutrality that revealed neither approval nor condemnation. "You've invested considerable effort in this project," he observed, returning the letters to their envelopes with careful precision, "without consulting me regarding its appropriateness or desired outcome." "Yes," Clara acknowledged, accepting responsibility without qualification. "After seeing those designs, I recognize potential far beyond what you've currently pursued. My father's connections offered possible pathway for exploration without significant financial risk or commitment. And you determined this course without considering I might have specific reasons for not pursuing such expansion previously?" The question contained genuine curiosity beneath measured restraint that suggested suspended judgment rather than formed conclusion. Clara met his gaze directly, recognizing the moment required complete honesty. "I considered that possibility," she admitted, "and determined that presenting opportunity remained preferable to assuming limitation without confirmation." Something shifted in Eli's expression. Surprise at her directness, perhaps, or recognition of the careful consideration behind what might have appeared mere impulsive intervention. He rose from his chair and crossed to the window, moonlight silvering his profile as he gazed outward toward the darkened smithy, where his work had remained safely contained within established boundaries. "Margaret believed such expansion represented dangerous distraction," he said finally, his back still turned, but voice carrying clearly in the room's quiet. "Eastern markets seemed as distant as the moon, their tastes unpredictable and their loyalty questionable compared to steady local custom." "A reasonable assessment given your circumstances, then," Clara replied carefully. "A young family's security naturally outweighed artistic satisfaction, or potential prosperity, that remained theoretical rather than guaranteed." Ellie turned from the window, his expression now visible in the lamplight. "Yet you believe differently." "I believe circumstances have changed," Clara clarified. "Your reputation established through years of reliable service, your daughter's immediate needs secured through prudent management, your artistic vision matured through patient development alongside practical skills." She hesitated, then added the most personal observation. "And perhaps most significantly, your right to pursue satisfaction beyond mere security at this stage of life." The silence that followed seemed to expand beyond the kitchen's physical boundaries, filled with unspoken considerations that encompassed far more than mere business strategy. When Eli finally moved, returning to the table where her carefully prepared materials awaited final judgment, his expression had softened from initial wariness to thoughtful assessment. "These sketches," he said, lifting one that displayed a church baptismal font whose base incorporated flowing water rendered in silver and copper, "they're from memory? You created them based solely on brief exposure to my original designs?" Clara nodded, uncertain whether this observation represented appreciation or concern regarding her presumption. "I attempted faithful representation of essential elements without detailed reproduction that might compromise your proprietary concepts." "Remarkable retention," he commented. "Genuine admiration replacing earlier reservation. And considerable skill, despite your disclaimer about artistic limitations. My father insisted I learn basic drafting to assist with his business correspondence," Clara explained. "Though my abilities remain functional rather than genuinely artistic." Eli studied the letters once more, his attention lingering on specific passages she had crafted with particular care. "You present my work with considerable faith in its market potential," he observed, "beyond what I myself might have claimed with confidence." "I describe what I've observed with my own eyes," Clara countered quietly. "Both the physical objects you've created and the designs representing what you're capable of producing given appropriate opportunity." Setting the materials down with deliberate care, Eli leaned back in his chair, his expression now holding something approaching cautious hope beneath lingering reservation. "Eastern markets would require significant adaptation. different client expectations, communication challenges across considerable distance, potential complications with shipping and installation. All legitimate considerations, Clara agreed, recognizing that his response now focused on practical implementation rather than fundamental objection. Yet none, representing insurmountable obstacles given appropriate planning and reliable business associates. Such as these men to whom you've addressed these letters? Eli asked, indicating the envelopes bearing names that held significance only to Clara. My father considered them honorable businessmen with appropriate connections and reasonable commission expectations, she confirmed, though I would anticipate correspondence and sample exchange before any significant commitment from either party. Eli nodded, his fingers tapping thoughtfully against the portfolio's leather surface. You've considered this thoroughly, he acknowledged. Far beyond mere enthusiastic intervention without practical framework. I believe in your work, Clara said simply. Its quality deserves wider recognition and appreciation than Silver Creek alone can provide. Something in her straightforward declaration seemed to resolve Eli's remaining hesitation. He gathered the letters and returned them to the portfolio with decided movement that suggested decision rather than continued deliberation. We should review the sketches once more before sending, he said, his use of plural pronoun confirming shared purpose rather than merely permitted intervention. Perhaps select one additional design that demonstrates range beyond architectural elements. Clara released the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, relief washing through her with unexpected intensity. You're not angry at my presumption. Initially, Eli admitted with honesty that had become hallmark of their deepening relationship. The designs represented private expression I'd kept carefully separated from public work for many years. He closed the portfolio with gentle finality. But perhaps such separation has outlived its purpose, particularly when someone whose judgment I've come to respect sees value where I've seen merely personal indulgence. The simple acknowledgement of her judgment's value touched Clara more deeply than effusive gratitude might have done. It represented not merely permission for specific action, but recognition of her place within his life and business, a position of trust and respected insight rather than merely domestic management. As they spent the next hour reviewing designs and selecting additional examples for inclusion with her correspondence, Clara marveled at the transformation their relationship had undergone since her arrival at the Thornton household. From desperate applicant to trusted household manager to genuine partner in shaping future possibilities, each step had occurred through such gradual evolution that individual moments of change remained difficult to identify. Yet here they sat at the same table where she had once nervously interviewed for employment, now discussing business strategy with the comfortable rhythm of established partnership. Ellie contributed technical details she couldn't have known to include, while she offered perspective on Eastern market preferences that expanded his understanding of potential clients' expectations. When they finally completed the revised correspondence well past their usual retiring hour, Ellie gathered the portfolio with careful hands that acknowledged its importance beyond mere paper contents. Thank you, he said simply as they prepared to extinguish the lamps, for seeing possibilities I'd stopped allowing myself to consider. Sometimes fresh perspective reveals what familiarity has obscured, Clara replied, wondering if they both recognized that observation applied to more than merely business opportunities. As she prepared for sleep that night, Clara reflected on the evening's significance beyond its immediate outcome. Whatever response their correspondence might generate from distant Boston, something equally meaningful had already occurred within the Thornton household. Further dissolution of barriers between employer and employee, between established patterns and new possibilities, between separate individuals and emerging partnership that benefited all involved. Like the garden's flourishing plants, now bearing fruit beyond initial hopeful seedlings, their shared life had developed from tentative arrangement to organic connection, still requiring careful tending, still vulnerable to unexpected challenges, yet undeniably thriving in ways none could have anticipated when first planted in Montana's promising but demanding soil. Chapter 9. Unspoken Feelings. September arrived with the gentle mercy that often followed August's brutal heat, bringing cooler mornings and the particular golden quality of light that transformed ordinary landscapes into scenes worthy of an artist's canvas. The Thornton garden, object of such determined labor through spring and summer, now offered abundant evidence that faith and persistence could indeed coax life from Montana's resistant soil. "We should celebrate," Clara suggested one Friday evening as they surveyed the day's harvest. Plump tomatoes still warm from afternoon sun, green beans that had exceeded all expectations, and carrots whose sweetness Hannah declared superior to any purchased from the general store. A proper acknowledgement of our garden's success. "Like a party?" Hannah asked, eyes brightening at the prospect. "With special food and everything?" "I was thinking of a Sunday picnic," Clara elaborated, glancing toward Eli for his reaction. "By the creek, where it's cool. We could prepare food tomorrow and enjoy it after church services." Eli, who had been examining a particularly impressive squash with the same critical attention he brought to his metalwork, looked up with mild surprise. "A picnic," he repeated, as if testing the concept for feasibility. "Haven't had one of those since." He stopped, the unfinished reference to Margaret hanging briefly in the air before he continued with characteristic practicality. "The water's still reasonable for wading, despite the season's advance." His unspoken acknowledgement that pleasant memories need not be permanently abandoned due to associated loss represented one more indicator of healing Clara had witnessed over her months with the Thorntons. What had once been territory too painful to revisit had gradually become accessible again, approached with proper respect but no longer categorically avoided. "Can we bring fishing poles?" Hannah asked, already envisioning the outing's possibilities. "And maybe those honey cakes Mrs. Jensen showed you how to make?" "If your father agrees to the excursion," Clara replied, maintaining the careful deference to Ellie's authority that structured their household despite increasingly collaborative decision-making. "Seems appropriate recognition of efforts well rewarded," Eli said with the slight nod that served as his characteristic gesture of approval. "The garden has certainly exceeded reasonable expectations." The simple acknowledgement carried more significance than mere agreement to Sunday entertainment. Clara recognized it as validation of her initial proposal that had met such skepticism, her conviction that Montana soil could produce more than the minimal yields Margaret had managed during her limited gardening attempts. Their thriving vegetable patch represented not just nutritional benefits and household economy, but visible evidence that certain boundaries could be expanded beyond assumed limitations. Preparations occupied much of Saturday, with Hannah chattering constant suggestions while Clara baked bread, prepared cold chicken, and assembled the honey cakes that had become household favorites since Mrs. Jensen had shared her mother's recipe. Ely contributed practical considerations, crafting a lightweight container to transport drinking water, locating the seldom-used fishing equipment, and identifying the ideal location along the creek that offered both shade and suitable wading access. Sunday morning's church service seemed interminable to Hannah, whose fidgeting throughout Reverend Thomas's sermon drew several gentle reminders from Clara about proper behavior. Even Eli appeared unusually alert to the service's conclusion, his typical patient attention replaced by occasional glances toward the window, where sunlight promised perfect weather for their planned outing. When they finally arrived at the chosen spot alongside Silver Creek, Clara understood their anticipation. The location Eli had selected offered remarkable beauty even by Montana's elevated standards. A grassy bank shaded by cottonwoods whose leaves had just begun showing hints of autumn gold, the creek flowing with gentle music over smooth stones, and wildflowers still offering late-season color along the water's edge. "This is perfect," she said as Eli helped her down from the wagon, his strong hands steadying her briefly before releasing with the proper decorum that governed their physical interactions. "You've found a genuine paradise." "Used to bring Hannah here when she was smaller," he replied, the casual reference to earlier family outings offered without evident pain. "The water's shallow enough for safe play, but moving sufficiently to interest a child." Hannah had already scrambled down unaided and now stood at the creek's edge, shoes in hand and expectation bright on her features. "May I wade now before we eat, please?" "Mind the current," Eli cautioned as Clara nodded permission. "And stay within sight of our picnic spot." While Hannah splashed delightedly in the shallows, they established their picnic on a clean quilt spread beneath the largest cottonwood. The domesticity of the scene, Clara arranging food while Eli positioned cushions she'd brought for comfortable seating, carried the comfortable rhythm of partnership developed through daily proximity and shared purpose. "Who would have imagined this outcome when you first arrived?" Ellie observed, the rare expression of perspective catching Clara's attention as she unwrapped bread still warm from morning baking. A thriving garden, expanding business prospects, and Sunday picnics with actual celebration rather than mere endurance of necessary social obligation. The observation, offered without dramatic emphasis but evident appreciation, touched Clara deeply. "Much has changed," she agreed, her gaze drifting to Hannah, who now balanced on stepping stones with the confident grace of childhood. "All for the better, I believe." "Undoubtedly," Eli confirmed, settling on one of the cushions with the relaxed posture rarely displayed within community observation, "though I'm not certain I properly expressed appropriate gratitude for your role in those improvements." Clara smoothed the quilt's surface with careful attention that disguised the emotion his acknowledgement evoked. "Mutual benefit requires no special gratitude," she replied. "We've all contributed to the household's current state." Their conversation paused as Hannah approached, proudly displaying a perfect stone she'd discovered, flat, round, and bearing a fossil impression that captured Eli's genuine interest. He examined her treasure with appropriate seriousness, explaining how ancient creatures sometimes left such marks in stone when conditions allowed proper preservation. "Like memories," Hannah observed with the occasional startling insight that reminded Clara how quickly the child matured. "They leave marks that stay even when they're gone." The simple comment carried unintended poignancy that briefly shadowed Eli's features before he nodded agreement. "An apt comparison," he said, returning the stone to his daughter's damp hands. "Some marks remain permanently visible while others require more careful examination to discover." When Hannah returned to her exploration, now searching for additional fossils with scientific determination, Clara and Eli remained seated side by side on the quilt, a comfortable silence settling between them as they watched her. The creek's gentle murmur provided peaceful accompaniment to birdsong and the occasional rustle of leaves overhead, creating a sense of removal from daily concerns despite being scarcely 2 miles from their home. "I understand why you chose this spot," Clara said after several minutes of shared quiet. "It feels somehow separate from ordinary time and demands." Eli nodded, his gaze following Hannah's progress along the creek bank. "Margaret called it our thinking place," he said, the reference to his late wife now offered without apparent difficulty. "Said the water's movement helped untangle knotted thoughts and wash away unnecessary concerns." The casual inclusion of Clara in this family memory represented significant evolution from the man who had once avoided any mention of his previous happiness. She recognized the implicit trust in his willingness to share such personal recollection without fear she might misconstrue its meaning or significance. They sat in companionable silence as afternoon sunlight filtered through cottonwood leaves, creating dappled patterns across the quilt and picnic provisions. When Hannah eventually tired of water exploration and joined them for the delayed meal, her enthusiastic descriptions of discoveries filled any need for adult conversation. Clara found herself content simply to exist within this perfect moment, the three of them connected by shared appreciation for simple pleasures and genuine interest in one another's observations. As they finished eating, Hannah's energy finally showed signs of depletion. She stretched out on the quilt's edge, using a cushion as pillow while continuing to examine her collected stones with gradually slowing movements. Within minutes, her regular breathing confirmed that exploration and excitement had finally yielded to the inevitable nap that accompanied such stimulation. "She'll sleep briefly but deeply," Eli observed quietly, his expression softened by familiar paternal affection as he watched his slumbering daughter. "These outings always exhaust her more thoroughly than she anticipates." Clara nodded, reaching for the basket of apples she'd packed for later refreshment. "She's created enough memories today to fill her dreams quite pleasantly," she replied, selecting a particularly perfect specimen and offering it toward Eli. "Would you care for—" Her words faltered as their hands met over the apple, his fingers brushing against hers in what began as accidental contact but somehow transformed into something more deliberate. Neither withdrew immediately, the brief touch lingering as afternoon sunlight warmed their skin and time itself seemed to suspend normal progression. Clara found herself suddenly acutely aware of details normally kept safely distant through careful maintenance of proper boundaries. The substantial strength in Eli's work-calloused fingers, the surprising gentleness in their careful pressure against her own, the altered rhythm of her breathing as their gazes met above this point of unexpected connection. His expression revealed similar awareness, along with something that might have been surprise at his own response to this simple physical contact. The moment stretched between them, neither advancing beyond this initial touch nor retreating from its implications. In the suspended silence, Clara felt a shift in possibility, as if unseen doors had opened between carefully separated chambers of existence, allowing glimpses of potential futures previously unconsidered or deliberately avoided. A sudden splash of cold creek water across both their laps shattered the moment with shocking abruptness. Hannah stood before them, eyes dancing with mischief and dripping hands extended in evidence of her deliberate interruption. "You both looked so serious," she exclaimed, giggling at their startled expressions. "Like you'd forgotten how to talk or move or anything." The childish observation, delivered with innocent accuracy, broke whatever spell had momentarily wrapped them in private awareness. Eli recovered first, reaching for his daughter with playful retribution that sent her shrieking with delighted terror across the grass. Clara found herself laughing despite the confusing emotions still circling beneath her composed exterior, grateful for Hannah's unconscious intervention before the moment had progressed beyond comfortable exploration into territory requiring deliberate acknowledgement or uncomfortable retreat. As they eventually packed their picnic and prepared for the homeward journey, outward routine maintained familiar patterns. Eli securing equipment while Clara and Hannah folded the quilt, all three contributing observations about favorite aspects of their outing. Yet beneath these ordinary actions flowed undercurrents of recognition that something had shifted, however subtly, in the careful balance they had established over months of shared life. Neither Clara nor Eli referred directly to that suspended moment of connection, yet awareness of its occurrence colored subsequent interactions with heightened consciousness of physical proximity and potential contact. When Eli offered his hand to assist Clara into the wagon, the brief touch carried significance beyond mere courtesy. When she passed Hannah toward him for placement on the seat between them, their gazes met with unspoken recognition of altered awareness that would require eventual addressing. The journey home proceeded through countryside painted with late afternoon light that transformed ordinary landscape into something touched with unusual beauty. Much as that simple moment of connection had illuminated possibilities previously existing but unacknowledged between them. Hannah's cheerful commentary provided comfortable distraction from more complex considerations, allowing each adult private contemplation of what had transpired and what might follow. For Clara, the touch had confirmed suspicions long held but carefully contained, that her feelings for Eli Thornton had evolved far beyond appropriate employee attachment or even familial affection, into something both more profound and more complicated. For the first time, she had glimpsed similar possibility in his response, raising questions about appropriate progression that both exhilarated and unsettled her carefully maintained composure. As the wagon followed familiar curves toward home, Clara found her thoughts returning to Hannah's innocent observation about fossil impressions. Like memories, they leave marks that stay even when they're gone. Today had created just such an impression, she realized. A moment that would remain embedded in memory regardless of what followed, changing the landscape of possibility between them through simple recognition that certain feelings, however carefully unnamed, undeniably existed. The September morning dawned with the particular crispness that suggested autumn's approach despite lingering summer warmth that would return by midday. Clara had risen early to begin bread making, enjoying the peaceful solitude before Hannah's energetic presence and Eli's quiet strength would complete the household's familiar morning rhythm. The kitchen windows stood open to admit cool air that carried scents of garden vegetation and distant pine forests, creating perfect environment for contemplative work. 3 weeks had passed since their creekside picnic, the intervening days filled with seasonal activities that provided comfortable structure despite occasional moments when awareness of unspoken possibilities created brief tension, quickly disguised by practical concerns. Neither Clara nor Eli had referred directly to that suspended moment of connection, yet both maintained subtle, heightened consciousness of proximity and interaction that suggested mutual recognition of altered perspective. The sound of horse hooves approaching at unusual speed drew Clara's attention from the dough she kneaded. She wiped flour-covered hands on her apron before moving to the window, concerned that such urgent arrival might herald emergency requiring immediate response. The rider proved to be young Thomas Jensen, whose family's ranch adjoined Silver Creek's northern boundary, his usual easygoing manner replaced by evident purpose as he reined his mount at the Thornton gate. "Ms. Abernathy," he called, spotting her at the window. "Got something special from town for Mr. Thornton. Stagecoach brought it yesterday, but Pa forgot to give it to me until this morning." Clara stepped onto the porch, curiosity piqued by the boy's excitement. "Mr. Thornton's at the forge," she replied, gesturing toward the smithy where Eli had been working since dawn's first light. "Shall I call him for you?" "No need, ma'am," Thomas replied, already dismounting with the boundless energy of 14 years. "Pa said it's important business correspondence that shouldn't wait." He produced a large envelope from his saddlebag, its quality immediately apparent, even from Clara's position on the porch. "From Boston, Massachusetts." Clara's heart stuttered briefly before resuming at accelerated pace. Boston correspondence could mean only one response. Their carefully prepared inquiry to Eastern markets had found its target and generated reply. Whether positive or negative remained to be discovered, but the mere existence of response represented significant development worthy of immediate attention. "I'll ensure Mr. Thornton receives it promptly," she assured Thomas, descending the steps to accept the envelope with hands she forced to remain steady despite inner excitement. "Please, thank your father for sending it along so quickly." After the boy's departure, Clara stood momentarily undecided, the substantial envelope weighty in both physical and potential significance. Proper protocol suggested waiting for Eli's return to the house at mid-morning break, allowing him private review of business correspondence without presumptuous intervention. Yet, the potential importance of its contents, combined with their mutual investment in the initiative that had generated it, argued for immediate delivery and shared discovery. The decision made itself as Eli emerged from the smithy, likely drawn by the sound of Tomas's arrival and departure. His questioning expression as he approached transformed to immediate recognition when he observed the envelope in Clara's hands, its Boston postmark visible even at distance. "It came," he said simply, removing his leather work apron as he crossed the yard with purposeful stride, sooner than anticipated. Clara nodded, her usual composure challenged by genuine excitement she made no attempt to disguise. "Thomas Jensen delivered it just now. His father received it with yesterday's stagecoach mail." They stood facing each other in the yard's center, momentarily suspended between eager discovery and apprehensive uncertainty. The envelope represented more than mere business correspondence. It embodied potential validation of Clara's faith in Eli's artistic vision and possible pathway toward expanded purpose for talents long constrained by practical limitation and local expectation. "Perhaps we should open it together," Eli suggested, the inclusive pronoun acknowledging Clara's essential role in generating this opportunity. "On the porch, where light's better for reading." The simple invitation touched Clara deeply, confirming their evolving partnership in this venture, regardless of whatever response the envelope might contain. They settled on the porch bench, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, as Eli carefully broke the substantial wax seal bearing Harrison Winthrop's distinctive imprint. Multiple pages emerged from the envelope, along with smaller folded documents that appeared to be formal business correspondence, rather than merely polite rejection or cursory acknowledgement. Eli unfolded the primary letter, positioning it where both could read simultaneously, his usual reserve momentarily abandoned in shared anticipation. September 4, 1874. Mr. Eli Thornton, Thornton Metalworks, Silver Creek, Montana Territory. Dear Mr. Thornton, your exceptional metalwork designs, brought to my attention through correspondence from Miss Clara Abernathy, daughter of my late esteemed colleague Edward Abernathy, have generated considerable interest within Boston's architectural and design community. The sketches provided, while acknowledged as simplified representations of completed work, nevertheless demonstrate artistic vision and technical capability, rarely encountered, even among established Eastern workshops. Winthrop & Sons would be pleased to discuss potential representation of selected pieces for discerning clients currently engaged in significant renovation and construction projects throughout New England. Of particular interest are architectural elements incorporating native Montana motifs, which would provide distinctive character unavailable from conventional sources. To proceed further, we would require physical samples demonstrating material quality and execution precision. The enclosed documents outline proposed business arrangements, shipping considerations, and commission structures typical for distance enterprises of this nature. Additionally, I have included specific inquiries regarding several designs that generated immediate interest from clients already engaged with our establishment. Should this proposal meet with your approval, please respond at earliest convenience with indication of time frame for sample preparation and any questions regarding proposed arrangements. Miss Abernathy's recommendation carries significant weight given her father's impeccable judgment regarding quality craftsmanship. However, physical examination remains essential before formal commitments can be established. I look forward to potential association with Thornton Metalworks and introduction of your distinctive creations to appreciative Eastern clientele. Respectfully yours, Harrison Winthrop. Winthrop & Sons Fine Furnishings, Boston, Massachusetts. Clara finished reading moments before Eli, his more deliberate consumption of the message evident in his continued focus on the page after she had absorbed its essential content. She remained silent, allowing him proper time for complete understanding and private reaction before attempting to express her own response to this unexpectedly positive development. When he finally looked up, his expression held complex mixture of emotions: cautious pleasure, lingering disbelief, and something approaching vindication, long denied, but finally offered. "He believes in the designs," Eli said quietly, the simple observation carrying weight beyond its literal meaning. "Based largely on your recommendation and simplified sketches. Based on the quality evident even in limited representation," Clara corrected gently. "My connection merely opened the door for consideration. Your craftsmanship provided the substance that generated genuine interest." Eli shook his head slightly, not in disagreement, but apparent wonder at unexpected validation. "Eastern markets," he said, the concept clearly still processing in his practical mind. "Architectural commissions beyond Silver Creek's limited demands or expectations." "Exactly what your sketchbook designs deserve," Clara replied, unable to restrain the satisfaction warming her voice. "Appreciation from those with both understanding of exceptional quality and means to commission its creation." As the full implications gradually settled into reality, Eli began examining the additional documents with increasing animation, his customary reserve yielding to genuine excitement Clara had rarely witnessed in their months together. He identified specific pieces that could serve as appropriate samples: calculated shipping requirements for safe transport across considerable distance, and speculated about workshop adjustments needed for potential increased production. "We'll need proper shipping crates constructed to Eastern standards," he observed, the practical considerations providing comfortable structure for processing more emotional response to this opportunity. "And photographic documentation of larger pieces that can't be transported economically as samples. Mr. Peterson mentioned the new photographer in Helena creates excellent representations of three-dimensional objects," Clara contributed, drawn into the practical planning that would transform theoretical possibility into tangible reality. "Perhaps we might arrange expedition there with selected pieces once we've determined appropriate samples." Their conversation continued with increasing animation, practical concerns gradually yielding to genuine excitement as full recognition of opportunity penetrated initial caution. When Eli unfolded the specific inquiries regarding designs that had generated immediate interest, they discovered that Clara's careful selection had proven remarkably effective. 3 of the 5 sketches had prompted specific client inquiries, with preliminary discussion of potential commissions should sample quality confirm initial impression. "You chose perfectly," Eli acknowledged, genuine admiration replacing earlier reservation about her initiative. "The very designs most suited to current Eastern architectural preferences. My father's business taught me recognition of emerging trends," Clara replied, pleasure at his acknowledgement warming her voice. Though the designs themselves provided the substance that attracted genuine interest. As they reviewed the final document outlining proposed commission structures, their mutual excitement reached culmination in simultaneous recognition of potential financial impact. The figures Harrison Winthrop suggested for completed architectural elements exceeded local commissions by significant margin, even accounting for increased material costs and shipping expenses. "This could change everything," Ellie said quietly, the statement encompassing far more than mere business considerations. Workshop expansion, apprentice training, materials previously considered extravagant but justified by appropriate commission levels. "Your castle dreams recognized and appropriately valued," Clara added softly, recalling his description of designs Margaret had considered impractical distraction. Their gazes met with shared understanding of this possibility's significance beyond mere commerce. Validation of artistic vision long subordinated to practical necessity, recognition of talent deserving wider appreciation than local limitations permitted, potential purpose extending beyond Silver Creek's modest needs to broader contribution. The moment's emotional impact manifested in spontaneous physical expression neither had anticipated nor could apparently restrain. Clara found herself embracing Eli in impulsive celebration of possibility realized, her arms circling his substantial frame in unconscious echo of Hannah's enthusiastic demonstrations of affection. More surprising was his immediate reciprocation, strong arms returning the embrace with equal enthusiasm, momentarily suspending propriety in genuine shared joy. The contact lasted mere seconds before mutual awareness of impropriety created awkward separation, yet its impact lingered in heightened color across Clara's cheeks, and uncharacteristic discomposure evident in Eli's abrupt focus on reorganizing scattered documents. The embrace, innocent in intention but charged with unacknowledged undercurrents, had crossed boundaries carefully maintained through months of developing connection. "I should return to work," Eli said after clearing his throat with evident self-consciousness. "Lots to consider regarding appropriate samples and workshop adjustments." "And I've bread dough waiting," Clara agreed, equally grateful for practical distraction from complicated awareness of how perfectly they had fit together during that brief, impulsive contact. "Hannah will be awake soon, expecting breakfast." Their separation to respective duties provided necessary space for processing both the business correspondence and unexpected physical connection it had prompted. Throughout the morning, Clara found herself revisiting that brief embrace with uncomfortable frequency. The solid strength she had felt beneath her impulsive touch, the surprising gentleness in his reciprocating arms, the momentary perfection of connection before propriety had reasserted necessary distance. More unsettling was recognition of how natural the contact had felt despite its inappropriateness. Not merely expression of shared excitement, but manifestation of deeper connection developing beneath careful maintenance of proper boundaries. The touch had confirmed suspicions long held but carefully contained that her feelings for Eli Thornton had evolved far beyond appropriate employee attachment into genuine emotional and physical awareness that would require eventual acknowledgement and resolution. The day progressed with outward normalcy despite this undercurrent of altered awareness. Hannah's enthusiastic response to news of Boston interest provided welcome distraction. Her innocent excitement about potential workshop expansion and Eastern appreciation of her father's talents, requiring no disguise or qualification. Eli maintained polite distance during their few necessary interactions, his focus apparently absorbed by practical considerations regarding sample preparation and business correspondence. Evening eventually brought familiar routine, supper shared with comfortable conversation focused primarily on Hannah's activities and community news, followed by usual household chores completed with practiced efficiency. Clara had just settled Hannah for sleep with their customary reading and prayers when she realized the house had grown unusually quiet. Eli's presence notably absent from his usual evening position in the front room. Concern that their morning's awkward moment might have driven him to uncomfortable avoidance of shared space prompted Clara to check the smithy, where firelight suggested he might have retreated to solitary work despite the day's advanced hour. The workshop behind the main forge stood similarly illuminated, its single window glowing with lamplight that confirmed his presence within that private sanctuary. Clara approached, with no intention beyond brief inquiry regarding any needs before she retired for the night, perhaps coffee or simple confirmation of breakfast timing for morning planning. As she neared the workshop's partially open door, however, Eli's voice stopped her forward progress. Not in awareness of her approach, but in what was unmistakably private prayer, never intended for external audience, for sending her into our lives. His deep voice carried clearly through the night air, low but distinct in the evening stillness. Hannah flourishes under her care and guidance. The household functions with purpose and harmony unknown since Margaret's passing. Even the business expands toward possibilities I'd abandoned as impractical dreaming. Clara knew she should announce her presence or retreat immediately, proper behavior allowing no justification for eavesdropping on such private communication. Yet something in his tone, raw honesty rarely displayed in daily interaction, held her momentarily paralyzed between courtesy and compelling need to understand, emotions carefully concealed beneath his habitual reserve. "But these feelings, Lord," his voice continued, evident struggle replacing earlier certainty, "they extend beyond appropriate gratitude or convenient arrangement. She deserves better than widower with limited prospects and young child requiring maternal guidance. Yet I find myself increasingly," he paused, seeming to search for adequate expression, "drawn to possibilities I'd believed permanently closed by Margaret's passing." The confession, clearly never intended for Clara's hearing, confirmed suspicions she had both nurtured and attempted to dismiss through months of developing connection. Eli's feelings apparently mirrored her own evolving attachment, creating both potential for deeper relationship and complicated questions regarding propriety, timing, and appropriate progression from current arrangement to whatever might follow. Unwilling to further violate privacy never intended for her awareness, Clara retreated silently toward the house, her thoughts in turmoil despite outward composure maintained through practiced self-discipline. Eli's prayer had confirmed what their brief embrace had suggested, that mutual feelings existed beyond professional arrangement or convenient household management, extending into emotional territory requiring eventual acknowledgement and resolution. As she prepared for sleep in her small room, Clara found herself considering Hannah's innocent observation about fossil impressions. Like memories, they leave marks that stay even when they're gone. Today had created another such impression, she realized, knowledge that could never be unlearned. Awareness that would influence every subsequent interaction, regardless of whether direct acknowledgement ever occurred between them. The household now balanced on threshold between established patterns and potential transformation, much as Thornton Metalworks itself stood poised between local limitation and expanded possibility. Whether forward movement would occur immediately or require further preparation remained uncertain. Yet Clara recognized that return to previous comfortable ignorance had become impossible for either of them. Like seeds planted in properly prepared soil, certain awareness, once established, could only progress toward eventual emergence, growing at their own necessary pace, perhaps, but undeniably alive and developing beneath surface appearance that might temporarily disguise their existence, but could not prevent their eventual revelation. October arrived with brisk mornings that painted frost on the window glass and transformed the landscape into a canvas of crimson and gold. The Thornton garden had yielded its final bounty, with root vegetables carefully stored in the newly cleaned root cellar and shelves lined with preserves that would brighten winter meals with summer's remembered sweetness. As winter's preparation intensified, Clara found herself making more frequent trips to Porter's General Store, each visit requiring more careful list-making, as they anticipated needs that would become difficult to fulfill once heavy snows made travel to town challenging. On this particular Thursday morning, her basket already laden with coffee, sugar, and lamp oil, Clara consulted her list for remaining items while Mrs. Porter attended another customer near the fabric bolts. 3 spools of heavy thread, cinnamon, and... she murmured to herself, scanning the remaining items. Well, if it isn't Miss Abernathy. The voice behind her carried a familiar cadence that caused Clara to stiffen momentarily before turning with carefully composed features. Sarah Wright stood barely an arm's length away, her condition immediately apparent in the substantial curve beneath her unbuttoned coat. Though Clara had glimpsed her occasionally since their first painful meeting upon her arrival in Silver Creek, they had maintained mutual distance that served both women's dignity. "Mrs. Wright," Clara acknowledged with a polite nod. "I trust you're keeping well." "As well as can be expected," the woman replied, one hand resting protectively over her evident pregnancy. "The children are healthy, which is blessing enough in uncertain times." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken history and complicated connection that defied easy social navigation. Clara searched for appropriate response that acknowledged their shared experience without reopening painful wounds. "I'm pleased to hear the children thrive," she said finally. "Your daughter showed me the doll you made her when I encountered her with Mrs. Porter last month. Her happiness spoke well of your care despite difficult circumstances." Something softened briefly in Sarah's expression, mother's pride momentarily overcoming other considerations. "She's a resilient child," she said. "As is Hannah Thornton, from what I observe at church and school functions." The mention of Hannah shifted the conversation toward territory Clara had not anticipated. She nodded cautiously, uncertain where Sarah intended to guide their exchange. "Hannah has indeed adjusted well to life's changes." Sarah studied her with unsettling directness, her gaze assessing in ways that made Clara uncomfortably aware of her position as subject of community observation and speculation. "She's become quite attached to you from all appearances," she observed. "As has her father, if town observations hold truth." Heat rose unwelcome in Clara's cheeks, despite her determined composure. "Hannah requires feminine guidance, and Mr. Thornton values reliable household management," she replied evenly. "My position provides both." Sarah's expression held something between pity and warning as she leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice despite the store's relative emptiness. "A word of caution, Miss Abernathy, offered without malice, despite our complicated connection," she said quietly. "Silver Creek has expectations regarding suitable matches for its established citizens. Eli Thornton will remarry eventually. It's inevitable for a man with his prospects and responsibilities, but when he does, it will be to someone of appropriate standing and background." The words landed like physical blows despite their soft delivery, striking precisely where Clara's private uncertainties had already created vulnerability. She maintained her dignity through practiced self-discipline, her expression betraying nothing of the internal turmoil Sarah's assessment had triggered. "Mr. Thornton's future arrangements are entirely his own concern," she replied, her voice steady despite the sudden hollowness beneath her ribs. "My role remains professional household management, regardless of community speculation." Sarah's gaze held something almost like sympathy beneath its directness. "You seem a decent woman, Miss Abernathy, despite circumstances that brought you to Silver Creek. I would dislike seeing you build expectations that community standards won't permit fulfillment." She adjusted her shawl with careful movement. James Wright appeared to offer security and position, yet delivered neither. I would spare another woman similar disappointment, whatever form it might take. Before Clara could formulate appropriate response to this uncomfortably perceptive assessment, Mrs. Porter approached with the remaining items from her list. The shopkeeper's arrival provided welcome interruption, allowing the conversation to dissolve into polite withdrawal as Sarah moved toward the dry goods section. Clara completed her purchase with outward composure that disguised the turmoil Sarah Wright's words had created. She nodded appropriate farewells, secured her purchases, and stepped into autumn sunshine that seemed suddenly less warming than before she'd entered the store. The encounter lingered in her thoughts as she walked homeward along Silver Creek's main street. Sarah's warning, however unwelcome, had given voice to considerations Clara had deliberately avoided examining too directly. The social reality that her position within the Thornton household existed at community sufferance rather than by recognized right or formal arrangement. Despite growing closeness evident in daily interactions and occasional unguarded moments, Clara remained employed rather than entitled, regardless of emotional attachments developing beyond professional boundaries. Her Boston background and education meant little in frontier social calculations that valued established connections and property above refined manners or intellectual attainment. As she passed the dressmaker's shop, Clara caught sight of Widow Camden examining fabric in the window. Her stylish attire and confident posture embodying precisely the suitable qualities Sarah had referenced. The widow's substantial property adjoining Thornton land, her respectable family connections extending to Helena's social circles, and her position as daughter of Silver Creek's founding family created legitimate standing that Clara's position as hired housekeeper could never match, regardless of growing affection. The remainder of her walk passed in uncomfortable self-examination. Clara had believed herself immune to social ambition after her experience with James Wright's deception, yet Sarah's warning had exposed lingering vulnerabilities she'd failed to acknowledge. Hope for permanent place within the Thornton household beyond mere employment. Her feelings for both Hannah and Eli had developed far beyond appropriate professional boundaries, evolving into genuine attachment she could no longer pretend remained merely practical arrangement. Hannah's increasing reference to her simply as Clara, rather than the more formal Miss Abernathy, Ellie's growing inclusion of her in business and household decisions, their shared daily rhythms and occasional unguarded moments of connection, all had created sense of belonging she now recognized as potentially misleading. As the Thornton house came into view, Clara paused briefly, gathering her composure before continuing forward. Whatever her private feelings might include, her present duty remained clear, providing stable household management and appropriate care for Hannah while maintaining proper professional boundaries with Eli. Community expectations and social realities existed whether she acknowledged them or not. Wisdom lay in recognizing limitations before expectations developed beyond possibility of fulfillment. She straightened her shoulders and continued up the path, determined that neither the Thorntons nor Silver Creek's observant residents would detect the uncertainty Sarah Wright's warning had planted in her carefully tended composure. Whatever the future might hold, present responsibilities remained unchanged, and Clara Abernathy had never allowed personal concerns to interfere with proper fulfillment of acknowledged duty. The warning signs began subtly, Hannah picking at her breakfast despite it featuring apple fritters she normally devoured with enthusiasm, unusual quietness during morning lessons, and cheeks slightly flushed despite the kitchen's comfortable temperature. Clara noted these indicators with growing concern, particularly when the child requested rest before completing her arithmetic exercises, unprecedented behavior from a girl who typically approached schoolwork with determined energy. "Perhaps you should lie down for a while," Clara suggested, placing a gentle hand against Hannah's forehead. The unnatural warmth beneath her palm confirmed suspicions that Hannah's unusual behavior stemmed from physical ailment rather than mere childhood reluctance. "I'm not really tired," Hannah protested without conviction. "Just a little warm." "Nevertheless, rest would be prudent," Clara replied, helping her from the table. "I'll prepare some willow bark tea to make you more comfortable." By midday, Hannah's condition had deteriorated from vague discomfort to unmistakable illness. Fever flushed her cheeks with alarming brightness while her small frame shivered despite the extra quilt Clara had tucked around her. When Clara returned from preparing lunch, Eli would likely forgo once aware of his daughter's condition. She found Hannah curled tightly beneath the covers, eyes unnaturally bright in her flushed face. "My head hurts," she whispered when Clara placed a cool cloth across her forehead. "And my throat feels scratchy when I swallow." "The willow bark tea will help with both," Clara assured her, concealing growing concern behind calm efficiency. "I've added honey to make it more palatable." Clara had just helped Hannah sit up to sip the medicinal tea when Eli's footsteps sounded on the porch. Earlier than his usual midday return and quickened in pace that suggested purpose rather than routine, he appeared in the bedroom doorway moments later, his expression shifting from inquiry to alarm as he took in the scene before him. "She has fever," he stated rather than asked, crossing to the bed with 2 long strides. "Since when?" "Mild symptoms at breakfast," Clara replied, supporting Hannah's shoulders as she drank the tea with evident difficulty. More pronounced within the past hour. I've prepared willow bark tea and cool compresses to address her discomfort while monitoring for changes. Eli's hand reached toward Hannah's forehead, then withdrew before making contact, his expression suddenly guarded in a way Clara hadn't witnessed in months. Fever, he repeated, his voice carrying tension that communicated far more than the simple word. Like Margaret's illness. The unspoken fear behind his statement struck Clara with sudden understanding. Hannah's mother had died of fever, circumstances Clara knew only through fragmentary references during their months together. For Eli, his daughter's current symptoms represented not merely childhood illness, but terrifying echo of loss, too painful to revisit. Childhood fevers often respond quickly to proper care, Clara said gently, recognizing his fear without directly addressing its source. My grandmother treated many such cases with herbal remedies and cool compresses. I've learned her methods thoroughly. Eli nodded without apparent reassurance, his gaze fixed on Hannah with intensity that reflected inner struggle between rational understanding and emotional memory. What can I do to help? He asked, his voice rigidly controlled. Fresh water from the well would be useful, Clara suggested, recognizing his need for purposeful action rather than helpless observation. And perhaps checking that we have sufficient firewood should we need to heat water throughout the night. He seized upon these practical tasks with evident relief, disappearing from the doorway with determined stride that suggested physical activity might temporarily distance him from encroaching fear. Clara turned her attention back to Hannah, who had finished the medicinal tea and now lay against her pillows with exhausted limpness that tugged painfully at Clara's heart. Try to sleep if you can, she murmured, smoothing damp hair from the child's forehead. Rest helps the body fight illness more effectively than any medicine. Hannah nodded weakly, her eyes already drifting closed as Clara gently bathed her flushed face with cool water. The child's vulnerability in illness affected Clara more deeply than she had anticipated. This fragile life had become precious beyond professional responsibility or even familial affection, reaching into emotional territory she had carefully avoided examining too directly. Throughout the afternoon, Clara maintained calm efficiency despite growing concern as Hannah's fever remained stubbornly elevated despite willow bark tea and cool compresses applied with meticulous regularity. Eli alternated between hovering anxiously at his daughter's bedside and abrupt departures for tasks that seemed designed primarily to provide distraction from helpless observation of suffering he could neither prevent nor alleviate. Perhaps we should summon Dr. Patterson from Banach, he suggested during one such bedside vigil, his knuckles white where he gripped the bedpost. He could arrive by morning if a rider left immediately. Clara considered the suggestion carefully, weighing genuine medical necessity against Eli's fear-driven need for action. Hannah's fever remains concerning but not yet dangerous, she replied honestly. Dr. Patterson's journey would require hours through darkness, and his remedies would likely mirror what we're already providing. She met his gaze directly, recognizing the trust her assessment requested. If her condition worsens or fails to improve by morning, sending for him would be prudent. For now, consistent care remains our best course. Eli nodded reluctantly, his expression revealing internal struggle between rational acceptance of her judgment and emotional need to take more dramatic action against threat to his daughter's well-being. You'll call me immediately if any change occurs? Without hesitation, Clara promised, understanding that his withdrawal represented self-protective instinct rather than indifference. Margaret's loss had left wounds that Hannah's illness now probed with painful precision, triggering memories too agonizing to face without defensive distance. As evening settled into night, Clara maintained her vigil beside Hannah's bed, applying fresh compresses and offering sips of water or herbal tea whenever the child stirred from restless sleep. She had just replaced a warmed cloth with cooler alternative when Eli appeared in the doorway, his expression revealing he had found little rest despite her assurances that she would summon him if needed. Any improvement? He asked quietly, moonlight from the window illuminating the worry etched across his features. The fever remains, but hasn't increased, Clara replied, keeping her voice equally low to avoid disturbing Hannah's fitful slumber. She's taken water willingly when roused, which suggests strength despite discomfort. L.A. moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could detect the scent of night air clinging to his clothing, suggesting he had spent time outdoors rather than attempting sleep. His gaze fixed on Hannah's flushed face with intensity that communicated fear he couldn't fully verbalize. Margaret's fever began similarly, he said after a long silence, the admission emerging with evident difficulty, mild discomfort that worsened rapidly until he couldn't complete the sentence, his jaw tightening against emotions too powerful for expression. Clara recognized the rare vulnerability in his disclosure. He had shared little about Margaret's final illness, beyond occasional oblique references. That he would speak of it now revealed both the depth of his current fear and growing trust in Clara's discretion and understanding. Many illnesses begin with similar symptoms yet follow very different courses, she said gently. Hannah has youth and natural resilience in her favor, along with immediate care her mother may not have received as promptly. Eli nodded without apparent conviction, his focus remaining on his daughter's restless movements. I was delivering commissioned work in Silver Creek when Margaret fell ill, he continued, the words emerging with difficulty. By the time I returned home, the fever had already... He swallowed hard, unable to complete the painful recollection. Clara reached instinctively to touch his arm, offering wordless comfort through simple human connection. You're here now, she said quietly. And Hannah has care from both of us, not just one parent struggling alone. Something in her simple reassurance seemed to penetrate his fear momentarily, his posture relaxing slightly beneath her touch. They remained in companionable silence as minutes stretched onward, united in shared concern for the child who connected them beyond employer and employee into something more complicated, yet undeniably meaningful. Near midnight, Hannah's fever intensified despite their continued ministrations. Her restless tossing increased, small whimpers escaping parched lips, despite Clara's diligent efforts with cool compresses and soothing murmurs. Eli paced the small bedroom with increasing agitation, his fear manifesting in physical movement he seemed unable to control. Should we send for the doctor now? He asked, pausing beside the bed as Hannah's distress became more evident. I could ride to Bannock myself, be there before dawn. Let me try one more remedy, Clara suggested, maintaining outward calm despite her own growing concern. My grandmother prepared a special tea for stubborn fevers that often succeeded when simpler treatments proved inadequate. At his nod of desperate agreement, Clara hurried to the kitchen where she combined specific herbs from her carefully maintained supply. Echinacea root, yarrow flowers, and elderberry. Steeped in water heated to precise temperature, her grandmother had taught required strongest medicinal effect without destroying delicate properties. The familiar ritual of preparation steadied her hands and thoughts, providing framework of practical action amid emotional concern. When she returned to Hannah's bedroom with the steaming cup, she found Eli seated on the bed's edge, his large hand engulfing his daughter's much smaller one as he spoke quiet reassurances the child likely couldn't comprehend in her feverish state. The tenderness in his expression, so at odds with the reserved demeanor he presented to the wider world, caught at Clara's heart with unexpected poignancy. Together they managed to rouse Hannah sufficiently to swallow small sips of the bitter tea, Clara supporting her shoulders while Eli coaxed her with gentle encouragement, far removed from his customary taciturn manner. Their coordinated efforts reflected months of developing partnership in Hannah's care, unspoken understanding flowing between them as they worked toward common purpose. As midnight passed into early morning hours, Hannah's restlessness gradually yielded to deeper, more peaceful sleep. The fierce heat radiating from her small form began to diminish, her breathing becoming more regular as the herbal remedy and cool compresses finally gained advantage over stubborn fever. Clara felt cautious relief bloom as she placed her palm against the child's forehead and found it noticeably cooler than an hour previous. The fever's breaking, she whispered to Eli, who had taken up position in the room's single chair after Hannah had finally settled into genuine sleep. Her body's winning the battle. His exhaled breath carried audible relief, the rigid tension that had marked his posture for hours finally easing somewhat. Your grandmother's remedy proved effective where others failed, he observed quietly. I'm grateful for knowledge passed through generations of women when medical science offers limited alternatives. The simple acknowledgement of female wisdom's value, so often dismissed by men accustomed to physicians' authoritative pronouncements, touched Clara deeply. Women have always been healers within their households, she replied. Necessity teaches what formal education often overlooks. As dawn approached with tentative illumination through the eastern window, Hannah stirred from deeper sleep into more natural slumber, her features relaxed and breathing regular. Clara, exhausted from hours of vigilant attention, found herself struggling to maintain upright posture in her bedside chair, despite determination to continue monitoring for potential fever's return. You should rest, Eli said softly, noticing her fatigue with characteristic perceptiveness. I'll watch over her while you sleep for a few hours. Clara intended to politely decline, unwilling to abandon her self-appointed responsibility despite exhaustion pulling at her limbs with increasing insistence. Before she could formulate appropriate response, however, Hannah stirred, more purposefully, her eyes fluttering open with confused disorientation typical of fever's aftermath. Ma? She murmured, voice scratchy from illness and parched lips. Ma, I'm thirsty. The single word froze both adults in momentary shock. Hannah gazing at Clara with fever-confused expectation, Eli's expression revealing complex emotions as his daughter unconsciously referenced absence that had shaped their household for years before Clara's arrival. The moment stretched between them, laden with implications neither was prepared to address directly. Clara recovered first, reaching for the water cup on the bedside table with outward composure that disguised inner turmoil. Here, Hannah, she said gently, supporting the child's head as she offered the cup. Small sips will help your throat. Hannah drank obediently before settling back against her pillows, eyes already drifting closed again as healing sleep reclaimed her. Stay with me, she murmured, her small hand finding Clara's with surprising strength given her recent illness. Of course, Clara assured her, settling more comfortably in her chair without releasing the trusting grip. I'll be right here when you wake again. Only when Hannah had slipped back into peaceful slumber did Clara dare glance toward Eli, uncertain what his reaction might be to his daughter's unconscious substitution and Clara's response. She found him watching them both with expression she couldn't fully interpret, something beyond gratitude, but carefully contained behind his habitual reserve. You should rest, he repeated quietly, rising from his chair with evident stiffness after hours of anxious vigil. I'll bring your quilt from your room. You can recline here without releasing her hand. The simple acknowledgement of the connection between Clara and Hannah, his willingness to accommodate rather than question his daughter's instinctive reaching for maternal comfort, communicated acceptance Clara hadn't dared anticipate. When he returned moments later with her quilt and small pillow from her bedroom, his careful arrangement of these comforts around her seated form carried consideration beyond mere employer's courtesy. Thank you, she murmured as exhaustion began claiming coherent thought despite her determination to remain alert. Wake me if her fever returns or if she needs anything I can provide. I will, he promised, settling back into his own chair with evident intention to maintain joint vigil despite the crisis having apparently passed. Rest now, Clara. You've earned it many times over this night. As sleep claimed her consciousness, Clara remained distantly aware of the tableau they presented, herself holding Hannah's small hand while Eli maintained protective watch over them both. A family configuration created by circumstance rather than convention, yet undeniably meaningful despite its unconventional formation. Sarah Wright's warning echoed distantly in her fading thoughts, reminders of community expectations and suitable matches that seemed strangely immaterial in this quiet room where genuine connection had transcended social propriety through shared concern for the child who linked them. Her last conscious awareness before surrendering to exhaustion was Hannah's small fingers still trustingly entwined with her own, and Eli's steady presence keeping watch over them both with protective attention that communicated more than words could adequately express. Whatever tomorrow might bring in terms of proper boundaries and social expectations, this moment held truth beyond convention. Belonging created through genuine connection rather than formal arrangement. Chapter 10. Summer's End. October's brilliant colors had begun to fade, replaced by the muted browns and grays that presaged winter's approach. The maple outside Hannah's window, which had flamed scarlet just days earlier during her illness, now stood half bare, its remaining leaves clinging with stubborn determination against autumn winds that stripped a few more with each passing day. Within the Thornton household, Hannah's recovery progressed with similar gradual certainty. Her fever had broken 3 days prior, leaving her weak but decidedly improved each morning. Clara maintained careful attention to nourishing broths and medicinal teas, while Eli altered his work schedule to spend additional time with his daughter, reading stories she requested, or simply sitting beside her bed whittling small animals that accumulated on her bedside table. On this particular afternoon, Clara had just finished changing Hannah's bed linens, a task made easier by the child's strengthening ability to move from bed to chair without assistance, when she noticed Eli's absence from his customary position in the smithy. Though he had adjusted his working hours during Hannah's illness, he rarely left the property without mention of his destination. "Do you know where your father might have gone?" she asked Hannah, who sat propped in her chair with a slate and pencil, practicing arithmetic problems with renewed concentration after days of illness-imposed idleness. Hannah glanced up, momentary shadow crossing her features before she returned to her calculation. "It's Thursday," she said simply, as if this explained everything. Something in her tone, carefully matter-of-fact yet underlaid with understanding beyond her years, triggered Clara's memory. Thursday marked the 4th anniversary of Margaret Thornton's death, a date Clara had recorded in the household ledger months earlier but temporarily forgotten amid recent concerns. "I see," she replied, matching Hannah's calm acceptance while inwardly berating herself for the oversight. "Would you like me to remain with you while he's away?" Hannah shook her head, pencil moving with determined precision across her slate. "He won't be long. He just goes to talk to her for a little while, then comes back steadier somehow." She looked up, meeting Clara's gaze with somber awareness. "It helps him remember her without getting the sad, angry look that used to stay for days." The insight, delivered with childish directness yet remarkable perception, touched Clara deeply. Hannah had observed her father's grief with the particular attention children bring to parental emotions, noting subtle shifts and patterns adults might believe successfully concealed. "Would you prefer time alone as well?" Clara asked gently. "I could attend to the garden harvest while you continue your studies." Hannah considered this with surprising thoughtfulness before shaking her head. "I remember Ma in different ways," she said finally. "By doing things she taught me, or wearing her locket, or helping you with household tasks she would have done." She returned to her slate with renewed concentration. "Pa needs the talking at her grave part more than I do." Clara squeezed the girl's shoulder gently before gathering the soiled linens, moved by Hannah's matter-of-fact acceptance of loss that had shaped her young life so profoundly. The child's resilience, her ability to incorporate grief into daily existence without being consumed by it, stood as testament to both Eli's parenting and her own innate strength of character. Outside, the afternoon had turned crisp with autumn's particular clarity that transformed ordinary landscapes into vistas of exceptional beauty. Clara hung the freshly washed sheets on the line where they snapped and billowed in a breeze scented with pine from distant mountains and the earthy sweetness of fallen leaves. The domestic task complete, she stood momentarily undecided, aware that Eli deserved privacy in his remembrance, yet concerned about his emotional state given Hannah's recent illness and its echoes of Margaret's final days. Decision formed almost without conscious thought, her feet carrying her along the path that led behind the property toward the small cemetery where Silver Creek's earliest settlers and their descendants found final rest. She had visited only once before, shortly after her arrival, when Hannah had proudly shown her the careful plantings that marked her mother's grave. The cemetery occupied a gentle rise overlooking the creek that had given the settlement its name, ancient cottonwoods providing dappled shade across stone markers and wooden crosses that recorded the community's losses. Clara paused at its entrance, suddenly uncertain about the propriety of intruding on Eli's private mourning. Before she could retreat, however, she glimpsed his tall figure standing alone at the far edge of the small graveyard, his posture suggesting deep contemplation rather than fresh grief. She remained hesitant until he turned slightly, awareness of her presence evident in the subtle straightening of his shoulders. When he made no move to either approach or withdraw, Clara interpreted this as neither welcome nor rejection, but acknowledgement that left decision in her hands. After brief deliberation, she moved forward with quiet steps, careful to approach from an angle that allowed him clear sight of her advance. "Hannah mentioned you might be here," she said simply when she reached the grave's edge, offering explanation without apology or unnecessary elaboration. Eli nodded, his gaze returning to the simple headstone that bore Margaret's name, dates marking her abbreviated life, and the inscription, "Beloved wife and mother," carved beneath. Wildflowers had been recently placed at its base, their stems wrapped in damp cloth to preserve freshness, evidence of his careful preparation for this memorial visit. 4 years today, he said after moments of silence that felt companionable rather than strained. Sometimes it seems a lifetime ago, other days mere weeks. Clara nodded, understanding this elastic quality of grief that expanded and contracted without predictable pattern. "The heart keeps its own calendar, distinct from ordinary time," she observed quietly. "My mother has been gone nearly 8 years, yet occasionally I turn to share some small discovery only to remember she's not there to receive it." The simple acknowledgement of shared experience seemed to ease something in Eli's posture, the slight relaxation of shoulders previously held with careful control, the deeper breath that suggested release of tension long maintained. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, united in respective remembrance of those whose absence had shaped their present circumstances. "Hannah's illness brought it all back," he said finally, the admission emerging with careful control that suggested difficulty rather than emotional distance. The helplessness, the fear that despite every effort, I might lose someone else He stopped abruptly, the unfinished sentence hanging between them with implications neither seemed prepared to examine directly. "Fear often speaks most loudly when we face echoes of previous loss," Clara offered carefully, honoring the confidence implied in his partial disclosure without pressing for completion. "My own parents died in a house fire when I was 17. For years afterward, even the smell of smoke from an ordinary cooking fire could trigger panic without warning or apparent reason." Eli turned toward her, genuine surprise replacing careful reserve. "You've never mentioned how they died," he observed, the implicit question presented without demand. "The wounds were still raw when I arrived here," Clara replied simply. "And afterward, it seemed there were always more immediate concerns requiring attention." She gazed at Margaret's headstone, considering how much to reveal of her own painful history. "They were trapped in the upper story when flames spread from a neighboring building. I survived only because I'd been sent on an errand that delayed my return home." The simple facts, stated without emotional elaboration, nonetheless carried weight. Eli clearly recognized. "Survivor's guilt," he said. Not question, but understanding recognition. The burden of continuing when those we love cannot. Clara nodded, surprised by his perceptiveness, yet somehow not astonished that this man who had experienced profound loss would comprehend its complex aftermath. "For years I believed I should have been with them," she admitted quietly, "as if my presence might have altered the outcome, though reason told me otherwise." "And now?" Eli asked, his attention fully diverted from Margaret's grave to Clara's face, his expression suggesting genuine interest in her response rather than mere politeness. "Now, I believe they would want me to live fully rather than merely exist in their absence," she replied, "to find purpose and connection despite the pathway that led to present circumstances." Something in her simple declaration seemed to resonate with Eli's own experience, his nod conveying understanding beyond words. "Margaret would approve of how Hannah has blossomed under your care," he said after a thoughtful pause. She valued practical competence and genuine kindness above more showy virtues some prize more highly. The acknowledgement that Clara's presence might meet with his late wife's approval rather than resentment or displacement touched her deeply. It suggested Eli had progressed beyond grief's initial possessive stage to more generous perspective that allowed new connections without perceiving them as disloyalty to what had been. "I wish I might have known her," Clara said sincerely. "Hannah carries her influence in countless small ways. Her diligence with household tasks, Her careful attention to detail, her concern for others' comfort before her own. Ellie's expression softened with evident appreciation for this recognition of his late wife's continuing presence through their daughter. "She would have liked you," he said with quiet certainty. "Despite superficial differences in background and experience, you share similar qualities she valued: practical wisdom, steady presence in difficulty, willingness to work toward long-term good rather than immediate convenience." This comparison with Margaret, offered without qualification or apparent concern that Clara might misinterpret its significance, represented trust Clara hadn't fully recognized until this moment. Ellie had shared memories of his late wife gradually over months of developing connection, but direct comparison suggested comfort level beyond previous boundaries. "Thank you," she said simply, acknowledging the compliment without embellishment that might have diminished its sincerity, "for allowing me to share this place and these memories." Ellie nodded, his gaze returning briefly to Margaret's headstone before he gestured toward the path leading homeward. "Hannah will be wondering about our absence," he observed. Practical consideration providing natural conclusion to their shared moment of remembrance. "And the afternoon grows cooler than advisable for someone recently recovered from fever." As they walked side by side along the path winding between golden grasses and occasional late-blooming wildflowers, Clara sensed subtle shift in their relationship. Not dramatic realignment, but gentle adjustment, like stream finding slightly altered course after seasonal changes to its banks. Eli had shared vulnerability, often concealed beneath practical capability, while she had revealed personal history previously deemed too painful for disclosure. These exchanges, though limited in explicit detail, had created deeper understanding between them, recognition of similar experiences that shaped present perspectives despite different circumstances, that had delivered them to this shared pathway. Like the season itself, poised between summer's abundance and winter's austerity, their connection, balanced between established patterns and emerging possibilities, neither seemed quite ready to name, but both increasingly acknowledged through small daily evidences of deepening trust. The letter from Boston's Harrison Winthrop had specified clear requirements for sample submission that would allow proper assessment of Thornton Metalworks craftsmanship and suitability for Eastern market representation. Each piece must demonstrate technical excellence while embodying distinctive character that distinguished it from conventional offerings available through established workshops. Additionally, detailed descriptions should accompany each item, providing background regarding materials, techniques, and inspiration that might enhance appreciation among discerning clientele. Clara had approached this task with characteristic thoroughness, selecting materials and creating systematic plan for documentation that would present Eli's work in most favorable light without misrepresentation or exaggeration. The kitchen table, cleared of its usual household purpose, now served as packaging station where carefully selected pieces awaited proper preparation for their journey eastward. "These cotton batting sheets should provide adequate cushioning," she observed, demonstrating the wrapping technique she proposed for a particularly delicate silver pendant whose filigree edges might otherwise suffer damage in transit, with additional craft paper securing each item within its individual compartment. Ellie nodded approval, his attention divided between Clara's demonstration and the wooden crate he was modifying with interior dividers that would prevent shifting during transport. The evening had advanced toward full darkness outside, while within the kitchen, lamplight created a pool of golden illumination that defined their shared workspace against shadowed corners beyond. "The hardwood supports should prevent compression, even if the crate encounters rough handling," he noted, fitting another precisely measured divider into grooves carved with meticulous attention. Eastern freight handlers may not exercise the care such pieces deserve without explicit warning. Their conversation maintained practical focus despite the undercurrent of anticipation that had characterized preparations throughout the week following Harrison Winthrop's encouraging correspondence. Both recognized the significance of this shipment beyond its immediate purpose. It represented not merely business opportunity, but validation of artistic vision long subordinated to practical necessity. As midnight approached, their careful packaging neared completion. Clara sat at the table, creating final documentation for each piece. Detailed descriptions incorporating both technical specifications and artistic context that might enhance appreciation among potential clients unfamiliar with Montana's landscapes and materials. Silver and Copper Creek Pendant. This piece embodies the meeting of waters that gives Silver Creek its name and character. Montana copper, mined from the territory's abundant natural resources, forms the flowing lines that represent the creek's path through our valley. Silver accents capture sunlight's reflection on moving water, demonstrating the luminous quality that first drew settlers to this region. She looked up to find Eli watching her with quiet attention, his customary reserve softened by something approaching wonder as he observed her transformation of technical details into narrative that conveyed meaning beyond mere craftsmanship. "You've captured exactly what I intended with that piece," he said, genuine appreciation warming his typically pragmatic tone, though I never articulated it in such terms even to myself. Clara smiled, pleased by his approval, yet aware of presumption inherent in attempting to verbalize another's artistic intention. "I merely observed what the piece itself communicates," she replied. "The craftsmanship tells its own story to attentive observers. Few possess such perception," Ellie noted, moving to stand beside her chair as he examined the neat pages of description she had completed for each item. "My father maintained similar belief that truly exceptional metalwork transcends mere function to convey meaning without words." The casual reference to his father, offered without apparent calculation or significance, nonetheless represented another small extension of personal history Eli rarely discussed. Clara recognized the opportunity for deeper understanding without appearing to press for confidence he might not intend. "He taught you the craft?" she asked, her tone suggesting interest without demand for elaboration he might find uncomfortable. Eli nodded, his attention seemingly focused on the silver pendant she had just described, though his thoughts clearly traveled elsewhere. "From earliest childhood," he confirmed. "Not with formal apprenticeship at first, but smaller lessons appropriate to developing abilities. How different metals respond to heat, the importance of proper tools maintained with appropriate care, patience required for detailed work that cannot be hurried without sacrificing quality." The description suggested nurturing guidance rather than stern instruction, painting picture of father-son relationship built on shared passion and mutual respect. Clara continued her documentation while providing attentive audience that invited further recollection without explicit request. "He specialized in practical ironwork that kept food on our table," Eli continued after a brief silence filled only by scratch of Clara's pen across paper. "But evenings and Sundays belonged to what he called his true work, pieces created for beauty beyond function, expressing something words couldn't adequately capture." His shoulder occasionally brushed against hers as he leaned closer to examine her writing, the casual contact seemingly unnoticed as his memories gained momentum after long containment. Clara maintained her writing with steady hand despite acute awareness of his proximity and the significance of memories being shared after years of careful privacy. "Margaret never knew him," Eli said, straightening to pace slowly around the table where their careful preparations neared completion. "He died the winter before we met, pneumonia, after retrieving a neighbor's child from frozen pond without thought for his own safety in bitter cold." The simple tribute factual description carrying evident pride and lingering grief touched Clara deeply. "A man of both skill and courage," she observed quietly, "whose legacy continues through your hands, and now Hannah's developing appreciation for craftsmanship beyond mere utility." Ellie paused in his movement, something unguarded in his expression suggesting surprise at this perspective. "I've never considered that continuation," he admitted, though Hannah does show remarkable patience with detailed work for her age, watching processes that other children find tediously boring with genuine interest in each step and outcome. "Your father would likely find great satisfaction in such generational transfer of both skills and appreciation," Clara observed, completing the final description with careful signature that transformed casual notes into formal documentation. "Values continuing beyond individual lifespans represent genuine legacy beyond mere physical creation." Ellie resumed his seat across from her, lamplight casting his features in warm illumination that softened habitual reserve into more contemplative expression. I haven't spoken of him in years, he said after thoughtful silence. Not since Margaret's passing created more immediate grief that overshadowed earlier loss. The simple acknowledgement of sharing long-coveted memories carried significance beyond its literal meaning. Clara recognized it as trust extended beyond practical partnership into emotional territory, where vulnerability required careful handling and appropriate respect. Some memories improve with careful keeping, she replied, gathering completed descriptions into ordered sequence that paralleled the crate's organized compartments, becoming clearer and more precious through deliberate remembrance rather than fading with time's passage. Like silver that requires occasional polishing to maintain its luster, Eli suggested, the metaphor drawn from his craft, yet perfectly capturing the concept she had attempted to express. Precisely, Clara agreed, their gazes meeting across the table in a moment of shared understanding that transcended the immediate task of package preparation. Their work continued in companionable silence, occasionally broken by practical questions or observations regarding specific pieces selected for Eastern evaluation. As midnight passed into early morning hours, exhaustion began claiming Clara's precise handwriting and Eli's meticulous carpentry, though neither suggested postponing completion until following day. The final piece, Clara said at last, holding the small silver bird Eli had created with extraordinary attention to detail, each feather rendered with such fidelity that it seemed perpetually poised for flight despite its metallic substance. Perhaps the most powerful demonstration of your artistic vision beyond functional craftsmanship. Eli watched as she wrapped it with particular care, her fingers moving with gentle precision that honored both the object's delicacy and the artistic spirit embodied within its form. That piece has special significance, he said quietly, as she nestled it into its designated compartment. Created during the winter after Margaret's passing, when words failed entirely, but hands could still express what heart contained, the simple explanation, offered without explicit emotion yet carrying profound significance, revealed previously unshared dimension of his grief journey. Clara recognized the confidence extended through this disclosure represented trust beyond ordinary association, entering territory of genuine emotional connection. Its power lies partly in that authentic expression, she observed, securing the compartment with careful attention that disguised how deeply his disclosure had affected her. Viewers respond to genuine emotion translated through artistic medium without necessarily understanding its specific source. Eli nodded, closing the crate's lid with gentle finality that represented more than mere completion of physical task. My father maintained that truly exceptional metalwork contains portion of its creator's spirit, he said, securing the fastenings with methodical precision. Something beyond technical skill or aesthetic design that communicates across barriers of time and circumstance. A form of immortality more meaningful than mere endurance of physical materials, Clara suggested, recognizing the philosophical depth beneath his seemingly casual observation. Perhaps, Eli acknowledged, his expression thoughtful as he straightened from the secured crate that now contained not merely metal objects but tangible evidence of artistic vision and personal history shared after long privacy, though connections formed in present life may prove equally significant in different manner. The simple statement, delivered without dramatic emphasis yet carrying undeniable meaning beyond its literal content, created a moment of suspended awareness between them. Lamplight cast their shadows against the kitchen wall, separate forms occasionally merging into single silhouette as they moved about completing final preparations for tomorrow's shipment to distant Boston. When at last the package stood complete, documented, secured, and addressed with careful precision to Harrison Winthrop's establishment, Clara found herself oddly reluctant to conclude their shared task, despite exhaustion pulling at her limbs and thought. The evening had contained something precious beyond practical accomplishment, connection formed through shared purpose and mutual understanding that transcended ordinary working partnership. We should rest, Eli said finally, extinguishing excess lamps until only single flame remained to guide their way toward respective bedrooms. Tomorrow brings early departure if the package is to meet Friday's eastbound stage. Clara nodded, gathering scattered papers with reluctant movements that disguised unwillingness to break the evening's unusual intimacy. Yes, of course, she agreed, practical consideration providing structure for emotions too complex for late-night examination. Hannah will likely wake earlier than advisable, given her recent illness, eager to participate in final preparations. As they moved toward the hallway leading to separate bedrooms, lamplight creating pool of illumination that traveled with them through darkness beyond, Clara felt renewed awareness of transition their relationship had undergone since her arrival at the Thornton household. From desperate applicant to valued employee to genuine partner in both business and family concerns, each stage had occurred through such gradual evolution that individual moments of change remained difficult to identify with precision. Yet this evening had undeniably represented significant marker in that continuing progression. Eli sharing memories previously kept private, Clara offering understanding based in similar experience rather than mere sympathy, mutual recognition of connection developing beyond practical arrangement into something neither seemed quite ready to name, but both increasingly acknowledged through daily evidences of deepening trust. "Thank you," Eli said quietly as they reached the point where hallway divided toward separate rooms, "for understanding the importance of these pieces beyond their commercial potential. Thank you for trusting me with both their presentation and the memories they embody," Clara replied with equal sincerity. Such confidence represents gift beyond mere professional association. Their gazes held briefly in lamplight's gentle illumination, moments of silent communication that acknowledged changed landscape between them without requiring immediate exploration of territory newly revealed. Like the carefully packed silver bird poised eternally between stillness and flight, their relationship balanced between established patterns and emerging possibilities. Neither wished to rush toward premature definition. "Good night, Clara," Ely said finally, her given name offered without self-consciousness or formal constraint that had marked earlier stages of their acquaintance. "Good night, Ely," she responded with similar naturalness, the simple exchange representing quiet acknowledgement of intimacy developed through shared purpose and mutual understanding rather than conventional progression of declared intentions. As Clara entered her small bedroom, lamplight briefly illuminating the wooden rose that remained permanent fixture on her bedside table since Eli's first absence months earlier, she recognized that significant journey had begun with this evening's shared confidences. Like the silver pieces now carefully packaged for Eastern evaluation, certain emotions once revealed could never return to unacknowledged concealment, regardless of whatever formal recognition might eventually follow their quiet emergence into shared awareness. Summer had ended not merely on calendar that marked seasonal progression, but in metaphorical sense as well. The initial growing season of their relationship yielding to deeper maturation that would require both continued nurturing and appropriate patience as natural development proceeded according to its own necessary timing rather than external expectation or arbitrary schedule. The first frost had silvered the garden's remaining vegetation, transforming ordinary beanstalks into crystalline sculptures that shimmered in early morning sunlight. Clara stood at the kitchen window, sipping her coffee as she contemplated the changed landscape. Summer's abundance giving way to autumn's more austere beauty in the natural progression that marked each year's cycle, regardless of human intervention or concern. Harvesting the garden's final offerings had occupied much of the previous week, with Hannah proudly recording yields in the household ledger Clara had established for tracking both production and preservation. Root vegetables now rested in sand-filled boxes in the newly cleaned root cellar, while preserved beans, tomatoes, and squash filled shelves in neat rows of glass jars that would brighten winter meals with remembered summer sunshine. "We've saved nearly $20 through gardening," Hannah announced as she entered the kitchen, the household ledger clutched importantly against her chest. She had taken to carrying it everywhere since Eli had suggested she assume responsibility for its maintenance as part of her arithmetic practice. "Plus all the vegetables we ate fresh that never got counted." "A significant contribution to household economy," Clara agreed, smiling at the girl's enthusiasm for record-keeping that might have bored less practically minded children. "Your father will be pleased with your careful accounting." Hannah settled at the table, opening the ledger with practiced formality, belied by the excitement dancing in her eyes. "I've been thinking," she began, the phrase carrying a mistakable echo of Clara's own characteristic expression when proposing household improvements. "The garden worked so well, perhaps we should consider other ways to produce rather than purchase essential provisions." Clara hid her amusement at this precocious adoption of adult phrasing, nodding with appropriate seriousness. "What provisions did you have in mind?" "Eggs," Hannah replied promptly, clearly having considered the matter thoroughly before raising it for discussion. "Mrs. Jensen says their hens lay almost year-round with proper care, and eggs purchased from the general store cost 3 times what it requires to produce them ourselves." Clara found herself simultaneously impressed by Hannah's practical thinking and conscious of significant omission in her calculations. "Producing eggs requires investment beyond feed costs," she noted, testing the depth of the child's consideration rather than dismissing her suggestion outright. "Proper housing, predator protection, initial purchase of laying hens, these represent substantial expenditure before any eggs appear." Rather than discouragement, this practical assessment seemed to energize Hannah further. She flipped to a blank page in the ledger, pencil poised with businesslike determination. "We should create a proper accounting to present to Pa," she declared, "with all expenses and projected savings clearly recorded for his consideration." The matter-of-fact assumption of Clara's participation, the unquestioned "we" that suggested permanent household arrangement rather than temporary employment, caught at Clara's heart with unexpected poignancy. Hannah had long since abandoned formal address, referring to her simply as Clara in daily interaction, but this casual inclusion in future planning carried deeper implications than mere familiarity of address. "A thorough proposal would indeed be appropriate," Clara agreed, maintaining practical focus despite the emotional undercurrent Hannah's innocent assumption had triggered. "Perhaps we might begin with research regarding proper requirements for successful chicken keeping in Montana's climate." This suggestion launched immediate planning session, with Hannah recording Clara's knowledge of appropriate housing dimensions, feed requirements, and protective measures against common predators. The girls' enthusiasm remained undimmed by practical considerations, each challenge perceived as problem to be solved rather than obstacle to desired outcome. When Eli entered from the smithy for his mid-morning coffee, a habit established during summer months and continued into autumn despite cooling temperatures, he found them surrounded by notes and calculations. Hannah's expression alight with purpose, while Clara guided her through estimation of winter feed storage requirements. "You appear engaged in serious business," he observed, pouring coffee with the unhurried movements that characterized his brief breaks from metalwork. "State secrets or matters open for general discussion?" "We're calculating whether keeping chickens would be economically advantageous compared to purchasing eggs," Hannah explained eagerly, pushing the ledger toward him with evident pride in their thorough examination. "Clara says proper housing and feed represent significant initial investment that must be considered against long-term savings." Eli's gaze shifted briefly to Clara, something like appreciation warming his expression at her practical approach rather than impulsive enthusiasm that might have encouraged unrealistic expectations. "A chicken coop would indeed require substantial construction," he noted, scanning the neat columns of figures Hannah had recorded, "with important considerations regarding predator protection and winter insulation." "But Mrs. Jensen says their hens provide eggs almost year-round," Hannah countered, clearly prepared to advocate vigorously for her proposal. "And Clara knows precisely how much feed is required per bird, so we can calculate exact costs against..." Again, the casual "we" that assumed ongoing household configuration beyond their original arrangement. A future projection that included Clara's continued presence as established fact rather than temporary circumstance. Eli seemed to register this assumption without comment, his attention apparently focused on the practical calculations, while deeper implications remained unaddressed. "Winter construction presents certain challenges," he observed, setting down his coffee cup as he considered alternatives with the careful assessment he brought to all household decisions. "Though materials remain available and the project could be completed before severe weather prevents outdoor work." "Then you'll consider it?" Hannah asked, barely containing her excitement at this tentative approval rather than outright dismissal. "I'll review your calculations," Eli replied, the slight emphasis suggesting recognition of Hannah's ownership of the proposal despite Clara's evident guidance in its development. "Though final decision must consider factors beyond mere economic advantage." When he had returned to the smithy with the ledger tucked under his arm for further examination during midday lull in customer requirements, Hannah turned to Clara with barely suppressed enthusiasm. "He's genuinely considering it," she exclaimed. "Not just humoring me with false attention." Your father respects well-reasoned proposals regardless of their source, Clara replied, recognizing the girl's need for acknowledgement of her growing maturity and capacity for meaningful contribution to household decisions. The thorough preparation you've undertaken deserves serious consideration. The remainder of the morning passed in ordinary household tasks, though Hannah's excitement manifested in occasional speculation regarding optimal placement of the proposed chicken coop and whether their first hens might be purchased from the Jensens' established flock or ordered from the agricultural supplier in Helena, whose catalog Mr. Porter kept behind the general store counter. When Eli returned for the midday meal, his expression held the thoughtful consideration that suggested genuine engagement with their proposal, rather than cursory review before predetermined rejection. He waited until they had finished their soup and biscuits before addressing the chicken question directly. "The calculations appear sound," he acknowledged, returning the ledger to Hannah with careful respect for her contribution. "Though certain considerations require adjustment based on materials already available versus those requiring purchase." Hannah straightened with the serious attention she brought to all matters involving numbers and practical planning. "What adjustments should we make?" she asked, pencil already poised to modify their calculations based on his more experienced assessment. "Lumber for basic construction exists in surplus from last spring's mill order," Eli explained, his tone suggesting instruction rather than correction. "Wire for protective enclosure would require purchase at current market rates rather than the previous figures recorded." The discussion continued through specific requirements, with Hannah recording each modification to their original calculations, while Clara cleared the midday dishes with quiet efficiency that allowed father and daughter to engage directly, without her intervention. The conversation, practical focus on immediate construction requirements and longer-term maintenance considerations, nonetheless carried undercurrent of significance neither adult acknowledged directly. Chicken keeping represented commitment extending well beyond seasonal gardening, requiring daily attention throughout changing seasons and years. By discussing optimal placement for prolonged use, feed storage for extended seasons, and construction meant to withstand multiple winters, they implicitly addressed household configuration, extending far beyond Clara's original employment arrangement. "If we begin construction this week, the co-op should be completed before heavy snowfall," Eli observed as their discussion reached natural conclusion. "With hens established before winter's coldest period tests the insulation's adequacy." "We'll need to select appropriate breeds," Clara contributed, drawn into planning despite her awareness of presumption inherent in long-term projection. "Some varieties withstand cold better than others, while certain types produce more consistently through winter months." "Mrs. Jensen recommended Orpingtons," Hannah interjected eagerly. "She says they're gentle-natured, cold-hardy, and reliable layers even during shorter days." Eli nodded, his expression holding the slight softening that appeared whenever Hannah demonstrated practical knowledge acquired through her own initiative rather than formal instruction. "Orpingtons would serve our purposes well," he agreed, "though acquisition may require special arrangement through Mr. Porter if the Jensens have no pullets to spare." The conversation continued through afternoon planning and into evening implementation, with Eli sketching preliminary construction designs, while Hannah calculated specific material requirements, with Clara's occasional guidance regarding typical chicken behavior and needs. The atmosphere carried comfortable domesticity that had developed through months of shared life, the easy rhythm of complementary contributions without competitive assertion or hierarchical dominance. As darkness gathered beyond windows illuminated by lamplight that created pool of golden warmth encompassing their shared table, Hannah's yawns finally signaled reasonable conclusion to the evening's planning. Clara guided her through bedtime preparations with practiced efficiency, listening to excited speculation regarding egg production, potential expansion if initial success warranted, and whether customers might eventually purchase surplus eggs if their flock proved particularly productive. "We're becoming a real farm family," Hannah observed drowsily as Clara tucked the quilt around her shoulders, "with gardens and chickens and maybe even a milk cow someday." The simple observation, delivered without calculation or conscious significance, nonetheless captured transition their household had undergone since Clara's arrival. From basic survival following Margaret's death to genuine thriving that encompassed not merely physical needs but emotional flourishing and future planning. The progression reflected more than mere economic improvement or practical efficiency. "Rest now," Clara murmured, smoothing Hannah's hair with gentle fingers. "Tomorrow brings ample opportunity for continued planning after school lessons are properly completed." When she returned to the main room, she found Eli still seated at the table, his construction drawings pushed aside as he gazed into middle distance with a thoughtful expression that suggested internal consideration rather than physical focus. He looked up as she approached, something unguarded in his features before habitual reserve reasserted partial concealment. "Hannah has fallen asleep already," Clara offered, uncertain whether to resume her mending or bid him good night without further conversation. Her excitement regarding chickens apparently proved insufficient to overcome physical fatigue. Eli nodded, his attention returning to the drawings spread before him. "She approaches each new project with remarkable enthusiasm," he observed, pride evident beneath his measured tone, though practical implementation often requires adult moderation of initial expectations. "A natural quality in childhood," Clara agreed, settling into her accustomed chair with mending basket that provided purposeful occupation for hands while conversation engaged mind. Though Hannah demonstrates unusual persistence once initial excitement encounters practical challenges, they worked in companionable silence for several minutes, Eli refining construction drawings with careful attention to practical detail, Clara repairing a tear in Hannah's school dress with neat stitches that would render the damage nearly invisible. The quiet domesticity of the scene struck Clara with sudden clarity. How thoroughly their lives had intertwined through daily shared purpose and mutual respect that transcended original employer-employee arrangement. "The chicken coop represents significant commitment," Eli said finally, breaking silence with observation that addressed practical structure while implying deeper consideration. "Daily care requirements extend throughout seasons regardless of weather conditions or competing demands." Clara nodded, understanding this practical assessment contained unspoken inquiry regarding her willingness to assume additional responsibility within household already requiring substantial attention. "I've maintained chicken flocks before," she replied carefully. "My aunt kept laying hens in Boston, with my assistants managing their daily needs, despite limited space and challenging conditions." Eli seemed to weigh her response, his expression suggesting evaluation extending beyond immediate practical considerations to longer-term implications neither had directly addressed. "Hannah assumes your continued presence as established fact, rather than temporary arrangement," he observed, the statement neither question nor accusation but simple recognition of reality they had both noticed yet avoided examining directly. Clara set her mending in her lap, meeting his gaze with matching directness that circumstances seemed to require. "Children naturally assume continuation of existing conditions unless given specific reason to anticipate change," she replied. "I've been careful not to encourage expectations beyond our current arrangement, though Hannah's affection sometimes leads to assumptions I cannot control without creating unnecessary concern." "Not incorrect assumptions," Ellie said after a moment's consideration, his gaze returning to the drawings before him, though his attention clearly remained engaged with their conversation. "Unless your own plans include departure I'm unaware of." The indirect inquiry, whether Clara herself anticipated eventual conclusion to her employment with the Thorntons, hung between them with significance beyond its literal question. Nearly 18 months had passed since her arrival in Silver Creek, a period far exceeding standard employment for unmarried women whose positions typically served as temporary station between family home and eventual marriage. "I have no current plans that would require separation from this household," Clara replied with careful precision that acknowledged the question's significance without presuming implications beyond immediate practical concern. "My position here provides both livelihood and purpose. I value significantly." Eli nodded, something in his posture relaxing slightly, though his expression remained characteristically reserved. "Then practical planning for permanent household improvements seems reasonable continuation of established arrangement," he concluded, the deliberately neutral phrasing nonetheless carrying undercurrent of significance beyond mere practical assessment. They returned to respective tasks without further discussion of deeper implications their exchange had contained. Yet Clara sensed subtle shift in atmosphere, acknowledgement, however indirectly expressed, that their household configuration had evolved beyond temporary convenience into something approaching permanence. Neither wished to disrupt through unnecessary change or redefinition. Like the proposed chicken coop itself, structure designed for enduring purpose rather than temporary shelter, their relationship had developed foundation and framework meant to withstand seasonal changes and provide ongoing sustenance rather than merely meeting immediate need. Whether formal recognition of this evolution might eventually occur remained an unaddressed question. Yet mutual acknowledgement of its existence represented significant steps beyond previous careful avoidance of implications inherent in their continuing arrangement. As Clara finally gathered her mending and prepared to retire for the night, she found herself contemplating Hannah's drowsy observation with renewed appreciation for its innocent wisdom. "We're becoming a real farm family." The simple statement captured essential truth more genuine than formal definitions or social classifications. Connection formed through shared purpose and mutual care that transcended conventional arrangements, through daily evidence of its meaningful reality. November arrived with deceptive mildness that old-timers warned presaged particularly harsh winter to follow. The chicken coop stood completed behind the garden plot, its fresh lumber and shining wire enclosure awaiting the pullets Mr. Porter had ordered from Helena's agricultural supplier. Hannah monitored the calendar with increasing anticipation, each day marked according to the shopkeeper's estimate of likely arrival. Clara had just gathered the week's soiled clothing for washing when the distinctive sound of wagon wheels approaching drew her attention to the front window. Visitors rarely appeared unannounced, particularly as winter's approach limited casual travel to essential journeys, rather than social calls or minor business that could await more clement conditions. The wagon pulling into the yard before the smithy displayed evidence of hard travel and poor maintenance, one wheel visibly wobbling while harness attachments appeared secured with makeshift repairs suggesting hasty, temporary solutions rather than proper attention. Its driver, back-turned as he assessed the smithy's open front, nevertheless triggered immediate recognition despite the intervening months since Clara had last encountered him. James Wright's broad shoulders and characteristic posture remained unchanged since their painful meeting upon her arrival in Silver Creek. Even without seeing his face, Clara identified him with certainty that sent uncomfortable awareness through her composed demeanor. Though occasional glimpses across Sunday services or distant sightings along Silver Creek's main street had occurred, they had maintained mutual distance that preserved dignity for all concerned. Her first instinct, retreat to household tasks that would prevent direct encounter, warred with practical recognition, that noon approached, bringing with it her customary delivery of Eli's midday meal. Any deviation from this established routine would require explanation she preferred to avoid. Suggesting importance to James Wright's presence he certainly didn't deserve and creating potential concern for Eli regarding her uncharacteristic alteration of household patterns. Determination to maintain normal routine despite uncomfortable circumstance led Clara to continue lunch preparation with outward composure that disguised internal disquiet. When the meal stood ready, venison stew from Sunday's roast, fresh bread still warm from morning baking, and apple tart Hannah had helped prepare the previous evening, she covered the basket with its customary cloth and straightened her apron with deliberate normalcy. "I'll return shortly," she called to Hannah, who sat at the kitchen table completing arithmetic exercises before afternoon geography lesson. "Continue through the multiplication table while I'm gone." The short walk to the smithy seemed vastly longer than its actual distance, as Clara approached the building where James Wright's voice now carried clearly. Its familiar cadence triggering memories she had deliberately set aside during months of building new life within the Thornton household. "Needs immediate repair if I'm to complete deliveries before weather turns," his voice explained as Clara approached the smithy's open front. "The axle showing wear that threatens complete failure if not addressed promptly." Eli stood examining the wagon's damaged wheel, his expression holding professional assessment rather than personal reaction to the customer before him. He glanced up as Clara approached, something shifting in his features that suggested recognition of potential awkwardness without overt acknowledgement that might draw unnecessary attention. Midday already? He asked, straightening from his inspection with casual movement that positioned him between Clara and James Wright with what appeared coincidental placement but clearly represented deliberate intervention. Time passes differently when technical challenges present themselves. Clara maintained composed demeanor, extending the basket toward him with practiced movement that suggested nothing beyond ordinary domestic routine. Hannah helped with the apple tart, she said, keeping her tone even despite acute awareness of James turning at the sound of her voice. Well, if it isn't the erstwhile bride herself, James observed, his tone carrying false joviality that barely disguised darker undertones. Still playing housekeeper to Thornton and his girl, I see. Clara turned toward him with dignity that refused acknowledgement of his attempt at discomfiture. "Mr. Wright," she greeted with minimum courtesy social expectation required. "I trust your family keeps well." Something unpleasant flickered across his features. Irritation at her composure, perhaps, or recognition that his presence created less distress than he might have anticipated or indeed hoped to generate. "Well enough, considering circumstances," he replied, his gaze traveling over her with assessment that carried inappropriate familiarity. "Sarah struggles with the pregnancy, but women generally complain regardless of actual difficulty. The casual dismissal of his wife's genuine medical condition, pregnancy complicated by previous difficult delivery and lingering weakness, Clara had heard mentioned at Sunday services, revealed callousness she had glimpsed only occasionally in their correspondence before her journey west. How fortunate her escape from legal binding to such a man, regardless of painful circumstances that had accompanied her discovery of his true character. "I'm sorry to hear of Mrs. Wright's difficulties," Clara replied with sincerity that ignored his dismissive tone. "Childbearing represents significant physical challenge even under ideal circumstances." James's attention shifted between Clara and Eli, something calculating entering his expression as he observed their interaction. "You might have avoided such concerns entirely had our original arrangement proceeded as planned," he commented, with deliberate casualness, belied by watchful assessment of their reactions. "Though perhaps current circumstances provide compensating advantages I hadn't considered when making my initial offer. The implication that Clara's position within the Thornton household might include arrangements beyond mere employment hung in the air with insulting connotation impossible to address directly without acknowledging its offensive suggestion." Eli's expression hardened perceptibly, though his voice maintained neutral professionalism with evident effort. "The axle shows significant wear that requires complete replacement rather than temporary repair," he stated, returning conversation to practical business with pointed redirection. "Materials will require special order from Helena unless you prefer local hardwood with limited durability." James shrugged, his attention remaining on Clara despite Eli's deliberate focus on the damaged wagon. "Local materials will suffice," he replied dismissively, "though I'm surprised to find Miss Abernathy still in your employ after all this time. Most unmarried women in such positions eventually secure more permanent arrangements through appropriate connection." The pointed observation, carrying implication that Clara's continued presence represented either lack of suitable alternatives or improper attachment, crossed boundaries of acceptable conversation, even by frontier standards, where directness often replaced Eastern social niceties. Eli straightened to his full height, his expression shifting from professional reserve to unmistakable warning that required no verbalization to communicate its message. "Completion time for proper axle replacement requires at minimum 2 days," he stated, his tone carrying finality that discouraged further conversation beyond immediate business necessity. Payment in advance for materials represents standard practice for special orders or extensive repair. James appeared momentarily taken aback by the abrupt shift from conversation to strictly professional interaction, his experience likely including preferential treatment due to his relative prosperity within the community regardless of personal reputation. He recovered quickly, however, producing payment from his coat pocket with exaggerated movement meant to display financial ease. 2 days, presents, inconvenient delay to my delivery schedule, he commented as he counted coins into Eli's outstretched hand. "Perhaps Miss Abernathy might offer coffee while we discuss potential acceleration of the repair process." "My household manager maintains separate schedule independent of smithy operations," Eli replied, his phrasing deliberate in its clear establishment of Clara's position and his respect for her autonomous authority within agreed parameters. The repair timeline reflects physical requirements rather than negotiable preference. The clear dismissal, courteous but unmistakable in its finality, left James with no reasonable opportunity for continued engagement without revealing explicitly offensive intent, impossible to disguise as mere social conversation or business discussion. He nodded with false affability that concealed evident irritation at being so effectively outmaneuvered. "I'll return Wednesday afternoon, then," he conceded with deliberate glance toward Clara that attempted to communicate private meaning she deliberately ignored. "Unless earlier completion proves possible through diligent attention." "Wednesday afternoon," Eli confirmed, without variation to the established timeline, despite the implied incentive for earlier completion. "The work will meet professional standards regardless of deadline." When James had departed with exaggerated courtesy that failed to disguise genuine displeasure at the encounter's outcome, Clara found herself unexpectedly overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. Relief at diplomatic conclusion to uncomfortable meeting, lingering discomfort at James's inappropriate insinuations, and profound gratitude for Eli's protective intervention that had maintained her dignity without excessive reaction that might have created greater difficulty. "I apologize for interrupting business discussion," she said quietly, awaiting his attention as he examined the damaged wagon with thorough inspection that would determine repair requirements. "Though lunch remains ready whenever you find suitable moment to eat." Eli straightened, his expression softening from professional assessment to genuine concern as he turned toward her. "No apology needed," he replied, moving to rinse his hands at the smithy's washing basin. "Wright's inappropriateness required limitation, regardless of business considerations." "Thank you," Clara said simply, for maintaining professional boundaries that prevented more awkward confrontation without compromising proper standards. Ellie dried his hands with deliberate movements that suggested internal consideration rather than mere physical action. Wright's implications were offensive beyond acceptable conversation, he observed, his tone controlled despite evident underlying anger. "Your position within our household merits respect, regardless of his personal disappointment regarding earlier arrangements. The simple validation, acknowledgement of both her rightful place within the Thornton home and the inappropriate nature of James's insinuations warmed Clara more deeply than elaborate defense might have done. Eli had neither overreacted with dramatic confrontation that would have validated James's implications through excessive protest, nor ignored genuine insult requiring appropriate response. His appearance was unexpected, Clara noted as they walked toward the house where lunch awaited. "I haven't encountered him directly since my arrival in Silver Creek." "Likely deliberate rather than coincidental timing," Billy replied, his observation reflecting practical assessment rather than unnecessary suspicion. "Peterson mentioned last Sunday that my recent commissions have generated discussion throughout the county. Wright's interest in Smithy business provides convenient excuse for personal assessment of rumors regarding household arrangements," the calm analysis. Recognizing without excessive concern that their household had indeed become subject of community interest and occasional speculation, suggested Eli maintained practical perspective regarding social realities without undue anxiety about external opinions. Clara found his matter-of-fact approach reassuring after months of careful navigation through Silver Creek's sometimes challenging social expectations. Gossip represents an inevitable aspect of small community life, she acknowledged as they reached the house where Hannah awaited them with completed arithmetic exercises and eager anticipation of the afternoon's geography lesson, focusing on European capitals. Though maintenance of appropriate standards eventually discourages the most determined speculation. Eli held the door for her with the automatic courtesy he extended, regardless of possible observation, his expression thoughtful rather than concerned as they entered the warmth of the home they had built together, from broken beginning into comfortable haven against both physical elements and social complications. "Some matters transcend community opinion," he observed quietly as Hannah greeted them with cheerful questions about the chicken coop's readiness for its anticipated inhabitants. Regardless of expectations others might maintain regarding suitable arrangements or conventional progressions, the simple statement, delivered without dramatic emphasis yet carrying unmistakable significance, suggested perspective Clara found unexpectedly comforting after James Wright's unpleasant reminder of her vulnerable position within Silver Creek's social hierarchy. Eli Thornton had demonstrated through both word and action that his household operated according to their mutual determination of appropriate standards, rather than external dictation of acceptable arrangements. As they shared the midday meal with Hannah's enthusiastic participation in conversation regarding afternoon lessons and the expected arrival of their chicken flock, Clara found herself contemplating the striking contrast between James Wright's calculated manipulation and Eli's straightforward integrity. One man had offered false promise with deceptive intent, while the other provided genuine respect without excessive declaration or empty assurance. The simple reality: their household functioned according to mutual commitment to shared values, rather than artificial adherence to external expectations. Provided foundation more substantial than formal arrangements, lacking genuine respect or sincere appreciation. Whatever the future might hold regarding potential evolution of their relationship beyond current parameters, its present reality rested on solid ground that had withstood significant challenge, without revealing fundamental weakness or structural inadequacy. Like the garden they had created from unpromising soil and the chicken coop now awaiting its productive inhabitants, their household stood as testament to collaborative effort yielding results beyond individual capacity or conventional expectation. James Wright's unfortunate appearance had provided, however unintentionally, opportunity to recognize the strength of what they had built together. Connection based on genuine mutual respect rather than social convenience or practical necessity alone.